What if that nagging feeling in the back of your neck was real? What if those hands reaching out from the dark that you believed were there, were there? What if the monster in the basement really existed? And what if there was really something under the bed? Would you have the courage to face your fears?
Chapter 1. The New Hunting Ground. The first scream pierced the air like a siren, jolting Marcus from his meticulous planning. He paused, knife hovering over the city map spread across his kitchen table, each red X marking a potential target, or at least what used to be potential targets. For a moment, he thought it might be one of his own victims, somehow escaped from the soundproof basement. But no, this was different. The scream carried a primal terror he'd never heard before, even in his most brutal moments. Marcus moved to the window, peering through the slats of his blinds. The street below, usually quiet at this hour, was chaos incarnate. People ran in all directions, their faces contorted in fear, and behind them, he squinted, disbelieving. Behind the fleeing crowd shambled figures that seemed human, yet moved with an unnatural, broken gait. Their skin was a sickly gray, clothes tattered and stained dark. As he watched, one of these things grabbed a fleeing woman, sinking its teeth into her neck with animalistic ferocity. "Well," Marcus muttered to himself, a wry smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "This certainly complicates things." He turned from the window, mind racing. The basement. He had to check the basement. Taking the stairs two at a time, Marcus reached the heavy steel door that concealed his dark secret. The lock clicked open, and he slipped inside, flicking on the harsh fluorescent lights. The body on the table hadn't moved. Of course it hadn't. He'd made sure of that days ago. But in this new world of walking corpses, he couldn't be too careful. Marcus approached cautiously, prodding the lifeless form with the tip of his knife. No response. Relief washed over him, followed quickly by a new concern. His carefully crafted world of control and predation was crumbling around him. The streets, once his hunting ground, were now teeming with a threat he didn't fully understand. Marcus returned upstairs, his mind already adapting to this new reality. He'd need supplies, weapons beyond his usual toolkit. The neighbors 2 doors down, the Johnsons, had a gun collection. He'd cased their house months ago, but had dismissed them as too risky as targets. Now, with the world falling apart outside, it was time to pay the Johnsons a visit. Marcus gathered his lock-picking tools and a few choice knives, slipping them into a backpack. He paused at the door, listening to the growing cacophony of screams and inhuman growls outside. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of fear. But fear, he reminded himself, was just another tool. He's used it countless times to manipulate his victims. Now, he'd use it to keep himself alive. Taking a deep breath, Marcus opened the door and stepped out into the chaos of this new world. A world where he was no longer the apex predator, but determined to adapt and survive at any cost. Chapter 2. Predator Becomes Prey. Marcus crept along the shadowy side of the street, every sense on high alert. The chaos had intensified in the short time since he'd left his house. Abandoned cars littered the road, some still idling, others smashed into poles or each other. The air was thick with the acrid smell of smoke and something else, something rotten. As he approached the Johnsons' house, a shuffling figure lurched from behind an overturned trash can. Marcus froze, his hand instinctively tightening around the handle of his knife. The creature, once a man, judging by the tattered remains of a business suit, turned its milky eyes toward him and let out a guttural moan. Time seemed to slow as Marcus assessed the situation. The zombie was closer than he'd like, but it was slow, clumsy. He could outmaneuver it easily. With a swift sidestep, Marcus dodged the grasping hands of the creature. In one fluid motion, he drove his knife deep into its temple. The zombie collapsed, twitching once before going still. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. Different prey, same result. Wiping his blade clean on the zombie's suit jacket, he continued towards his destination. The Johnsons' house loomed ahead, dark and silent. Too silent. The front door was ajar, never a good sign. Marcus slipped inside, his footsteps silent on the plush carpet. The living room was a mess. Furniture overturned, family photos shattered on the floor. A smear of blood led toward the kitchen. Following the trail, Marcus found Mr. Johnson, or what was left of him. The man's throat had been torn out, his glazed eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. Marcus felt a twinge of something. Not quite regret, but a sense of missed opportunity. He'd planned to kill Johnson himself one day. A noise from upstairs snapped him back to his attention. Soft sobbing, punctuated by ragged breathing. Someone was still alive upstairs. Marcus debated his options. The gun safe was his priority, but a survivor could be useful, or dangerous. As he pondered, a new sound reached his ears. The unmistakable moan of the undead, coming from the second floor. Decision made, Marcus moved swiftly up the stairs. The sobbing was coming from behind a closed door at the end of the hall. Between him and that door shuffled Mrs. Johnson, her floral house dress stained dark with blood, arms outstretched as she shambled towards the sound. With practiced ease, Marcus crept up behind her, one hand clamped over her mouth, more out of habit than necessity, while the others drove her knife into the base of her skull. She collapsed without a sound. Marcus approached the closed door, listening intently. The sobbing had quieted, replaced by panic, shallow breathing. He tested the handle. Locked. "Hello?" he called softly, adopting the soothing tone he'd perfected over years of luring victims. "It's okay. The danger's past. I'm here to help." A pause. Then a young voice replied shakily, "Dad? Is that you?" Marcus smiled to himself. This was familiar territory. "No, sweetheart. But I'm a friend. I can get you out of here safely. Can you open the door?" Another pause. Longer this time. Then the click of a lock disengaging. The door opened slowly to reveal a girl, no more than 12. Her tear-stained face a mixture of hope and fear. "Where are my parents?" she asked, peering past Marcus in the shadowy hallway. Marcus knelt down, meeting her eyes with a practiced look of sympathy. "I'm sorry. They didn't make it. But I promise, I'll keep you safe." As the girl's face crumbled in grief, Marcus felt a familiar thrill. In a world gone mad, here was something he understood. Here was control. "Come on," he said, gently, holding out his hand. "We need to find the gun safe and get out of here. It's not safe to stay in one place for too long." The girl hesitated, then took his offered hand. As Marcus led her down the stairs, carefully steering her away from her parents' bodies, his mind raced with the new possibilities. In this apocalyptic world, a man traveling with a child would draw less suspicion. She could be useful in more ways than one. For the first time since the outbreak began, Marcus felt truly in his element. The game had changed, but he was still a player, and he intended to win. Chapter 3. Adapting to Survive. The gun safe proved easier to crack than Marcus had anticipated. Years of finessing locks came in handy as his skilled fingers manipulated the dial. With a satisfying click, the door swung open, revealing a small arsenal. "What's your name?" Marcus asked the girl, as he efficiently loaded a backpack with handguns, ammunition, and a sleek hunting rifle. "Emily," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. She stood rigid in the doorway, arms wrapped tightly around herself. Marcus nodded, not looking up from his task. "Emily, I need you to be brave now. Can you do that for me?" A small nod was her only response. "Good girl. Now, I want you to go to the kitchen and fill any bags you can find with canned food and bottled water. Can you do that?" Emily hesitated, glancing towards the kitchen where her father's body lay. Marcus caught the look and softened his voice. "I know it's hard, but we need supplies to survive. Just don't look down, okay? Focus on the cabinets." As Emily reluctantly made her way to the kitchen, Marcus allowed himself a moment of reflection. The girl complicated things. She could slow him down, make noise at inappropriate moments, attract unwanted attention. But she could also be an asset, a shield against suspicion, a way to manipulate other survivors. And if things got desperate, well, he'd cross that bridge when he came to it. Marcus finished packing the weapons and moved to join Emily in the kitchen. He found her struggling to reach a high shelf, tears streaming down her face as she pointedly avoided looking at the floor. For a moment, an unfamiliar feeling tugged at Marcus. Was it pity? He pushed the sentiment aside. Emotions were a liability now. Here, let me, he said, easily reaching past her to grab the remaining cans. You've done well, Emily. Now, let's get out of here. As they stepped out onto the porch, the full extent of the chaos became clear. Fires burned, unchecked in the distance, casting an eerie glow over the neighborhood. The moans of the undead echoed throughout the streets, punctuated by occasional screams and gunshots. Marcus scanned the area, plotting their next move. The suburbs were too dense, too unpredictable, and they needed to get to open country where they could see threats coming. A scream cut through his thoughts, much closer this time. Down the street, a woman was frantically trying to barricade her front door as zombies pounded from the other side. Emily started towards the woman instinctively, but Marcus held her back. We can't help everyone, he said firmly. We have to think about our own survival now. The girl looked up at him, conflict clear in her eyes. But shouldn't we try? Marcus knelt down, meeting her gaze. Listen to me carefully, Emily. The world has changed. The rules we lived before, they don't apply anymore. From now on, it's us against them. And them isn't just the zombies. Do you understand? Emily nodded slowly, her young face etched with sadness that seemed beyond her years. Good, Marcus continued. Now we're going to make our way to the edge of town. Stay close to me, and do exactly as I say. No matter what you see or hear, you keep moving. Got it? Another nod. As they set down the street, Marcus felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. This was a hunt unlike any he'd experienced before. The stakes were higher, the prey more dangerous, but the thrill, that was the same. He glanced down at Emily, trotting to keep up with his long strides. A new piece in the game board, he mused, one that could prove very useful indeed. Behind them, a woman's scream abruptly cut off, replaced by the wet sounds of tearing flesh. Neither Marcus nor Emily looked back. The hunt was on, and Marcus intended to remain the predator, not the prey. Chapter 4. The Wolves Among Sheep. As dawn broke, Marcus and Emily reached the outskirts of town. The chaos had thinned, but the eerie quiet that replaced it was almost worse. Abandoned cars and scattered belongings littered the road, silent testaments of the panic that had gripped the area. They'd encountered a few more zombies along the way, but Marcus had dispatched them quietly and efficiently. Emily had watched with a mixture of horror and judging admiration. She was adapting quickly, learning to move silently and stay alert. We need to find a place to rest and plan our next move, Marcus said, scanning the area. His eyes landed on a small gas station just off the main road. There. It's isolated enough to see threats coming, but close enough to see the road if we need to move quickly. As they approached the station, Marcus held up a hand, signaling Emily to stop. Something wasn't right. The store seemed untouched, too pristine amidst the surrounding chaos. Wait here, he whispered, drawing his handgun. If anything happens, run and hide. Don't wait for me. Emily nodded, her eyes wide with fear. Marcus crept towards the store, every sense on high alert. As he neared the entrance, a voice called out from inside. That's far enough, friend. State your business. Marcus froze, his mind racing. He could hear at least two distinct voices inside, possibly more. Slowly, he raised his hands, keeping the gun visible. Just looking for supplies and shelter, he called back, injecting a note of desperation into his voice. My daughter and I, we've been on the run all night. A pause then. You alone? Marcus hesitated, then decided on honesty. No, my daughter's with me. She's just a child. Another pause. Longer this time. Then the door creaked open, revealing a grizzled man with a shotgun. "All right, come in, slowly, and tell the girl to come too." Marcus waved Emily over, noting the man's eyes linger on her a bit too long. As they entered the store, he took stock of the situation. 3 men, all armed. The one who'd spoken seemed to be the leader. The other 2 were younger, nervous, their fingers twitching near their weapons. "I'm Hank," the leader said, lowering his shotgun slightly. "This here's Pete and Liam. We've been holed up here since all hell broke loose." Marcus nodded, adopting a relieved expression. "I'm David. This is my daughter, Sarah. We're grateful for any help you can offer." Hank's eyes narrowed slightly. "Sarah, huh? Funny. I could have sworn I heard you call her Emily earlier." The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Marcus felt Emily tense beside him. "Well now," Hank continued, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Looks like we got ourselves a liar. And you know what they say about liars in times like these." In that moment, Marcus made a split-second decision. These men were predators, just like him. But they were sloppy, overconfident. He could use that. "You're right," Marcus said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I did lie. Force of habit, I suppose. You see, in my line of work, honesty wasn't always the best policy." Hank raised an eyebrow. "Oh? And what line of work would that be?" Marcus smiled, cold and dangerous. "Let's just say I'm very good at making people disappear. A skill that had proved quite useful lately." The younger men exchanged nervous glances, but Hank looked intrigued. "Is that so?" he said, lowering his shotgun further. "Well then, David, maybe we can come to an agreement. We could use a man of your talents." Marcus nodded slowly, his mind already formulating plans. These men could be useful for now, a buffer against the dangerous outside. And when they outlive their usefulness, well, old habits die hard. "I think we could work something out," Marcus said, placing a protective hand on Emily's shoulders. "After all, we're all just trying to survive, aren't we?" As Hank led them further into the store, Marcus caught Emily's eye. The fear was still there, but there was something else too. Understanding. In that moment, he realized she was more than just a useful prop. She was becoming a partner. The world had changed, but some things remained the same. There would always be predators and prey, and Marcus was determined to stay at the top of the food chain, no matter what it took. Chapter 5. The Art of Manipulation. Days blended into weeks at the gas station. Marcus, still going by David, had quickly established himself as an indispensable member of the group. His keen instincts and survival skills impressed even the skeptical Hank. Emily, for her part, played the role of traumatized child perfectly. She rarely spoke, sticking close to Marcus and avoiding the others. But her eyes missed nothing, and in private moments, she would whisper her observations to Marcus. "Pete's getting restless," she murmured one evening as they sorted through scavenging supplies. "He wants to make a run into town for more food." Marcus nodded, filing away the information. "Good work," he said quietly. "Keep watching." As the days passed, tension within the group grew. Food was running low, and the constant threat of zombie attack frayed nerves. Marcus watched it all with calculating eyes, waiting for the right moment to make his move. That moment came sooner than expected. It was Liam who snapped first. During a routine supply check, he suddenly grabbed Emily, pressed a knife to her throat. "This is bullshit!" he shouted, eyes wild. "We're all gonna die out here. We need to leave. Find somewhere better." The room erupted into chaos. Hank and Pete drew their weapons, shouting at Liam to calm down, but Marcus remained eerily calm, his eyes locked on Emily's. To her credit, the girl didn't panic. She met Marcus's gaze steadily, waiting for his signal. "Liam," Marcus said, softly, taking a step forward. "You're right, this situation is untenable. But threatening a child? It's not the answer." Liam's grip on Emily loosened slightly. "Then what is? We can't stay here." Marcus nodded sympathetically. I agree, which is why I've been planning our next move. This caught everyone off guard. Even Hank lowered his shotgun slightly, curiosity overriding caution. What are you talking about, David? Hank demanded. Marcus smiled, the same cold smile that had chilled countless victims before. I've been scouting the area. There's a small town about 20 miles north. It's mostly intact, with high walls, a perfect sanctuary. The lie rolled off his tongue smoothly, practiced over countless cons and manipulations. Why didn't you say anything before? Pete asked suspiciously. I needed to be sure, Marcus replied. We can't afford to take unnecessary risks. But now, I'm certain. It's our best chance. The tension in the room slowly dissipated. Liam released Emily, who scurried back to Marcus's side. Hank studied Marcus for a long moment before nodding. All right, David. We'll check out this town of yours. But if you're lying... The threat hung in the air, unspoken but clear. Marcus just smiled. Trust me, he said. I have all our best interests at heart. As the group began preparations for the journey, Emily tugged on Marcus's sleeve. There is no town, is there? She whispered. Marcus looked down at her, seeing not a child, but a promising protege. No, he admitted quietly. But by the time they realize it, it'll be too late. Emily nodded, a small, grim smile playing at her lips. What's our real plan? Marcus felt a surge of pride. She was learning fast. We're going to let the road and the zombies thin out our little group, he explained. And then, when the moment is right, we'll make our move. Just us? Emily asked. Marcus nodded. Just us. Remember what I told you. It's us against them, always. As they joined the others in packing supplies, Marcus felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. The game was changing, evolving, but he was still the master player. And with Emily by his side, adapting as quickly as he was to this new world, he felt invincible. The zombies might rule the world now, but in the shadows, among the survivors, a new kind of predator was emerging, and Marcus intended to be the apex of them all. Chapter 6. The Road to Nowhere. The group set out at dawn, their stolen pickup truck loaded with supplies. Marcus took the wheel, with Hank riding shotgun. Emily sat squeezed between Pete and Liam in the back seat, her small frame tense with anticipation. As they drove, Marcus spun elaborate tales of the sanctuary that awaited them. He described high walls, abundant food, and safety from the undead. With each passing mile, hope bloomed in the eyes of his companions, all except Emily, who watched the unfolding deception with quiet fascination. The first sign of trouble came around midday. A massive pileup blocked the highway, forcing them to detour onto smaller, unfamiliar roads. You sure you know where you're going, David? Hank asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. Marcus nodded confidently. Just a small setback. We'll be back on track soon. But as the afternoon wore on, the small setback grew into a major problem. The roads became increasingly rural, winding through dense forests. Twice, they had to stop to clear abandoned vehicles from their path, the noise attracting shambling hordes of the undead. During one such encounter, Liam's nerve broke. As Marcus and Hank fought off the zombies, Liam made a run for it, disappearing into the woods. Leave them, Marcus shouted as Pete moved to follow. We can't risk spreading ourselves thin. When the immediate danger passed, the remaining four regrouped by the truck. This is your fault, Pete sneered, rounding on Marcus. There is no sanctuary, is there? You've led us into the middle of nowhere. Marcus raised his hands placatingly. I know how this looks, but I swear we're close. We just need to... His words were cut off by a crack of a gunshot. Pete crumpled to the ground, a look of frozen shock on his face. Behind him stood Emily, Liam's discarded pistol smoking in her small hands. For a moment, no one moved. Then Hank raised his shotgun, aiming it at Marcus. I knew there was something off about you two, he growled. Start talking or you'll end up like Pete. Marcus glanced at Emily, saw the cold determination in her eyes, and made a split-second decision. You're right, Hank, he said calmly. There is no sanctuary. There never was. But think about it. Did you really believe there was some magical safe haven out there, in this world? Hank's grip on the shotgun tightened, but uncertainty flickered in his eyes. Marcus pressed on. The truth is, nowhere is safe. But some of us, people like me and Emily, we've adapted. We understand what it takes to survive in this new world. And right now, Hank, you have a choice to make. You can pull that trigger, maybe kill me. But then what? You'll be alone out here, with no plan and dwindling supplies. He took a step forward, ignoring the barrel of the gun now pressed against his chest. Or you can join us, learn to survive, really survive, in this world. What do you say? For a long moment, the only sound was the distant moaning of the undead. Then slowly, Hank lowered his shotgun. All right, he said, gruffly. I'm listening. As Marcus began to outline their new plan, Emily moved to stand beside him. Her eyes darted between the two men, the gun still held loosely in her hand. In that moment, Marcus felt a surge of something akin to paternal pride. Emily had taken her first life today, not out of fear or self-defense, but as a calculated move to further their survival. She was evolving, just as he had hoped. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the blood-stained road, Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The day hadn't gone exactly as planned, but the outcome was satisfactory. They had supplies, transportation, and a new ally, however temporary that alliance would be. In this new world of the undead, Marcus was creating something far more dangerous, a legacy. And as he caught Emily's eye, saw the glimmer of understanding there, he knew what legacy would outlive even him. The real game was just beginning. Chapter 7. The Hunter's Apprentice. As weeks turned into months, the unlikely trio of Marcus, Emily, and Hank carved out a nomadic existence in the zombie-infested world. They moved frequently, never staying in one place long enough to attract too much attention, from the living or the dead. Marcus watched the growing satisfaction as Emily's skills sharpened. She learned to move silently, to read people's intentions, and to strike without hesitation. Her childhood innocence had been replaced by a calculating coldness that mirrored his own. One crisp autumn morning, as they scavenged through an abandoned suburb, Marcus decided it was time for Emily's final test. Emily, he called softly, gesturing her over. I have a special task for you today. The girl's eyes lit up with interest. At 13, she was no longer the frightened child he'd first encountered, but a hardened survivor. Marcus nodded towards Hank, who was busy searching a garage for supplies. It's time we moved on for our friend here. He's becoming a liability. Emily's expression didn't change. You want me to kill him? She said flatly. Marcus smiled. Not quite. I want you to set him up. Lead him into a situation where the zombies will do our work for us. Can you handle that? For a moment, something flickered in Emily's eyes. A remnant of her old self, perhaps. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. Of course, she replied coolly. I have an idea. Marcus watched with pride as Emily approached Hank, her body language shifting subtly. She looked younger suddenly, more vulnerable. Hank, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I think I saw someone in that house over there. A survivor. Hank's head snapped up, eyes narrowing. You sure, kid? We haven't seen another living soul in weeks. Emily nodded earnestly. I'm sure. It was just for a second, but I saw some movement in the upstairs window. Hank hesitated, looking to Marcus for confirmation. Marcus shrugged, feigning indifference. We're checking out, I suppose, but be careful. As Hank cautiously approached the house, Emily trailing behind him, Marcus felt a familiar thrill. He'd orchestrated countless deaths, but this, molding Emily in his image, this was his masterpiece. From his vantage point, Marcus watched as Emily guided Hank into the house. Moments later, he heard the telltale moans of the undead, followed by Hank's panicked shouts. Emily emerged from the house alone, calmly closing the door behind her. The sounds of struggle continued inside, growing fainter. Well done, Marcus said as she rejoined him. How did you manage it? Emily shrugged, a ghost of a smile on her face. There was a closet full of them upstairs. I just had to get him in the right spot and open the door. Marcus nodded approvingly. And how do you feel? For the first time, Emily hesitated. I don't know, she admitted. Should I feel something? Marcus placed a hand on her shoulder. Emotions are a luxury we can't afford anymore, Emily. You did what was necessary for our survival. That's all that matters. As they gathered their supplies and prepared to move on, leaving Hank's fading cries behind, Marcus felt a sense of completion. Emily was no longer just a useful tool. She was an extension of himself. A legacy that would carry on his work long after the zombies or rival survivors finally claimed him. In this world of the undead, Marcus had created something truly terrifying. A perfectly molded psychopath, unburdened by conscience or hesitation. As they walked away from the suburb, Emily fell into step beside him, her eyes scanning the horizon for their next opportunity. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. The student was becoming the master, and together, they would carve out their own empire in this apocalyptic world. The zombies might rule the earth, but in the shadows, a new breed of predator was emerging, and Marcus couldn't be prouder.
The hiss of escaping air roused Dr. Alex Reeves from his cryosleep. His eyes fluttered open, struggling to focus in the dim, pulsing red light of the stasis chamber. Something was wrong. Alex's heart raced as he realized he was awake decades too soon. The colony ship Asteria wasn't due to reach New Eden for another 72 years. He fumbled with numb fingers at the release catch on his pod, fighting rising panic. As the lid lifted with a hydraulic whine, the acrid smell of electrical smoke stung his nostrils. Emergency klaxons blared in the distance, muffled by the vast rows of cryopods stretching into darkness. "Ship's AI status report," Alex croaked, his voice hoarse from disuse. A calm, androgynous voice responded. "Multiple system malfunctions detected in cryostasis Wing C. Life support compromised in sections 23 through 29. Awakening of essential personnel in progress." Alex swung his legs over the pod's edge, wincing at protesting muscles. "Casualties?" There was a pause before the AI replied. "Unable to determine at this time. Biosensors offline in affected areas." As feeling returned to his extremities, Alex noticed a sticky residue on his hands and arms. He squinted in the low light, his blood running cold as he recognized the dark, viscous fluid. It was the same substance they'd found in the alien artifact that had so excited the research team back on Earth. The substance that had seemed to react to human DNA in such promising ways. The klaxons cut off abruptly, plunging the chamber into eerie silence. In the distance, Alex heard a sound that turned his skin to ice, a low, inhuman moan, followed by the wet tearing of flesh. "Dr. Reeves!" The AI's voice had taken on an urgent tone. "Please proceed immediately to the medical bay. Quarantine protocols are now in effect." Alex stumbled to his feet, adrenaline clearing the last cobwebs from his mind. As he sprinted past rows of cryopods, he saw other confused crew members emerging. He wanted to warn them, to help, but survival instinct propelled him forward. Just before the stasis chamber's doors hissed shut behind him, Alex heard the first scream. Alex's bare feet slapped against the cold metal floor as he raced through the dimly lit corridors of the Asteria. The ship's layout, once so familiar during training, now seemed like a maze in the emergency lighting. "AI, give me a sit rep on the medical bay," Alex panted as he ran. "Medical bay is secure, Dr. Reeves. Chief Medical Officer Dr. Yara Chen is coordinating triage efforts. Caution. Unidentified biological threat detected in multiple sectors." Alex's mind raced. The alien substance, the system malfunctions, the screams. It all pointed to a scenario far worse than any of their contingency plans had anticipated. As he rounded a corner, he collided with a figure stumbling in the opposite direction. Both of them crashed to the floor. "Sorry, I didn't..." Alex's apology died in his throat as he looked up. The crew member, Alex recognized him as Johnson from engineering, stood swaying, his eyes glazed and unfocused. Dark fluid dribbled from his mouth and a gaping wound in his neck. "Johnson, are you all right?" Alex asked, slowly backing away. Johnson's only response was a guttural moan. He lunged at Alex with unexpected speed, teeth bared. Alex scrambled backward, narrowly avoiding Johnson's grasp. He kicked out, catching Johnson in the chest and buying himself enough time to scramble to his feet. "AI! Emergency! Crew member attacking! Needs restraint and medical attention!" Alex shouted as he sprinted away from the shambling Johnson. "Alert acknowledged. Security drones dispatched. Dr. Reeves, please continue to medical bay. Do not engage with potentially infected personnel." The corridors became more crowded as Alex approached the medical bay. Confused and frightened crew members pressed against the walls, giving him a wide berth as he ran past. Finally, the medical bay doors came into view. Alex practically threw himself at the entry panel, gasping out his security clearance. The doors slid open and he tumbled inside. "Alex, thank God you're here," Dr. Yara Chen called out from across the room. She was bent over a patient, her dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, stress evident on her face. As the doors sealed shut behind him, Alex took in the chaos of the medical bay. Every bed was occupied, and makeshift pallets covered the floor. Moans of pain mixed with the beeping of medical equipment and the harried voices of the medical staff. "Yara, what the hell is going on?" Alex asked, making his way to her side. She straightened up, snapping off her gloves. "We're not sure. Some kind of highly aggressive pathogen. It's turning people into... I don't even know how to describe it. Violent, mindless, incredibly strong, and it's spreading fast." Alex's stomach dropped. The alien substance from the artifact. It must have been reactivated somehow when the cryo systems malfunctioned. Yara's eyes widened. "You mean this is..." Her words were cut off by a piercing scream. They both whirled to see one of the patients on a bed convulsing violently, dark fluid pouring from their mouth and eyes. "Quarantine breach!" Yara shouted. "Seal off this section now!" As chaos erupted in the medical bay, Alex realized their mission of hope had just become a desperate fight for survival. The next few hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Alex and Yara worked tirelessly alongside the medical team, trying to understand and contain the rapidly spreading infection. "It's mutating faster than anything I've ever seen," Yara muttered, peering into a microscope. "The cellular structure is unlike any terrestrial pathogen." Alex leaned against a nearby counter, exhaustion etched on his face. "We need to wake the rest of the science team. This is beyond just medical." A loud bang on the sealed doors made them both jump. Through the reinforced glass, they could see a group of infected crew members, their faces contorted in rage, clawing at the entrance. "AI, status update on the rest of the ship," Alex called out. The AI's voice seemed strained, if that were possible for an artificial entity. "Infection has spread to 40% of awakened crew. Life support failing in multiple sectors. Bridge remains secure but cut off from lower decks." Yara ran a hand through her hair, leaving it even more disheveled. "We can't stay here forever. We need a plan." As if in response, a holographic display flickered to life in the center of the room, showing a 3D schematic of the Asteria. Captain Erika Nakamura's stern face appeared in a small window. "Dr. Reeves, Dr. Chen, report," the captain demanded. Alex quickly summarized their situation and findings. The captain's expression grew grimmer with each word. "Recommendations?" she asked when he finished. Yara stepped forward. "We need to wake key personnel from cryo-sleep, geneticists, virologists, anyone who can help us understand and fight this thing. But we have to be careful. If we wake too many at once, we risk spreading the infection further." The captain nodded. "Agreed. Dr. Reeves, I want you to lead a team to secure the cryo bay and begin selective revival. Dr. Chen, continue your work here. Try to find anything that slows this infection." "Captain," Alex interjected, "what about the uninfected crew members still out there?" A pained look crossed Captain Nakamura's face. "I've initiated lockdown protocols. Anyone still outside secure zones. We can't risk opening doors for them. It's containment, or we lose the whole ship. The gravity of the situation settled over the room like a heavy blanket. How do we get to the cryo bay? Alex asked, pushing aside his horror at the implications of the captain's order. A new schematic appeared, showing a route through maintenance tunnels and emergency shafts. It won't be easy, the captain warned, but it's our best shot. Assemble your team, Dr. Reeves. You leave in 30 minutes. As the hologram flickered out, Alex and Yara shared a grim look. The moans and banging from outside the medical bay doors seemed to grow louder. I'll need weapons, Alex said quietly. Yara nodded, moving to a locked cabinet. We modified some surgical lasers. They should be effective, but... She trailed off, unable to finish the thought of using them on their former crewmates. As Alex began to gather supplies and select his team from the medical bay staff, a chilling thought occurred to him. They were hurtling through space, millions of miles from any help, with an unknown alien infection turning the crew into monsters. And if they couldn't find a way to stop it, they might be bringing humanity's doom to their new homeworld. Alex adjusted the strap of the improvised weapon slung across his chest, eyeing his small team. Dr. Kira Yoshida, a neurologist with combat training from her time in the Earth Defense Force, stood ready by the maintenance hatch. Tech specialist Zain Mirza fiddled nervously with a tablet, likely running last-minute diagnostics on their route. Remember, Alex said, his voice low, we move fast, we stay quiet, and we don't hesitate if we encounter hostiles. Clear? Kira and Zain nodded grimly. With a deep breath, Alex keyed in the access code, and the hatch slid open with a soft hiss. The maintenance tunnel was cramped and dimly lit by flickering emergency strips. The trio moved in single file, with Kira taking point. The only sounds were their controlled breathing and the occasional distant clang echoing through the ship's infrastructure. First junction coming up, Zain whispered, consulting his tablet. We'll need to descend 2 levels to reach the main cryobay access. As they approached the junction, a wet, slurping sound reached their ears. Alex raised a fist, signaling a halt. Kira crouched, peering around the corner. She quickly pulled back, her face pale. Too infected, she mouthed silently. Feeding on... something? Alex's stomach churned. He held up 2 fingers, then pointed at Kira and himself. She nodded in understanding. On a silent count of 3, they rounded the corner. The infected crew members, hunched over an unrecognizable mass, looked up with blood-smeared faces. Before they could react, Alex and Kira fired their laser weapons. The intense beams seared through infected flesh, and the creatures collapsed without a sound. Zain, check our route. We need to avoid any more surprises, Alex ordered, trying to keep the shake out of his voice. As Zain worked, Alex's comm crackled to life. Alex, it's Yara. We've made a discovery. Go ahead, he responded, keeping his voice low. The pathogen seems to have a weakness to extreme cold. We're seeing reduced activity in samples exposed to cryogenic temperatures. Alex's mind raced. That explains why it lay dormant in the artifact and cryopods. Any luck with a treatment? Not yet, Yara replied, frustration evident in her voice. But it might buy us time. If we can lower the ship's temperature, we'd slow the spread. Alex finished. Good work. Keep at it. As he signed off, Zain looked up from his tablet. I've plotted a clear path, but we need to move. Ship's sensors show increased movement 2 sections over. They pressed on, descending through narrow shafts and winding corridors. The further they went, the more signs of struggle they encountered. Smears of blood, discarded weapons, hastily erected barricades. Finally, they reached the outer doors of the cryobay. Alex punched in his access code, but the panel flashed red. Damn it, he muttered. Zain, can you bypass it? Zain moved to a nearby access panel, fingers flying over the keys. Working on it. But Alex, I'm picking up life signs inside. A lot of them. Survivors? Kira asked hopefully. Zane shook his head. Unlikely. These readings are all over the place. I think... He was cut off by a loud bang from the other side of the door. Then another. And another. They're in the cryo bay, Alex realized with horror. If they've damaged the pods... The banging intensified, accompanied by inhuman shrieks. The door began to buckle. "Zine! How long?" Alex shouted over the din. 30 seconds. Too long, Kira growled, readying her weapon. As the door gave way with a screech of tearing metal, the trio found themselves face to face with a horde of the infected, their eyes wild and hungry in the flashing emergency lights of the cryo bay. Alex raised his weapon, knowing that their mission, and possibly the fate of the entire ship, hung in the balance of the next few moments. The cryo bay erupted into chaos as the infected crew members surged forward. Alex, Kira, and Zane opened fire, their modified lasers cutting through the air with deadly precision. The front line of infected fell, but more scrambled over their fallen comrades. "Fall back!" Alex shouted, laying down covering fire as Kira and Zane retreated into the corridor. They backed away, step by step, their weapons leaving a trail of smoldering bodies. But for every infected they took down, 2 more seemed to appear. "We can't keep this up," Kira grunted, her laser's power cell warning light blinking red. Suddenly, Zane's eyes lit up. The fire suppression system. If Yara's right about the cold, Alex caught on immediately. "Do it!" Zine's fingers flew over his tablet. Moments later, a klaxon blared, and icy mist began to spray from nozzles in the ceiling. The temperature plummeted rapidly. The effect on the infected was almost immediate. Their movements became sluggish, their shrieks dying down to low moans. Within minutes, they began to collapse, their bodies shutting down in the extreme cold. "It's working!" Kira exclaimed, lowering her weapon. Alex nodded, but kept his laser trained on the twitching forms. "Zane, can you get that door closed?" With the immediate threat neutralized, Zane managed to seal the cryo bay doors. The trio stood there panting as frost formed on their breath. "We need to move fast," Alex said, shivering. "The cold will affect us too if we stay here too long." They cautiously entered the cryo bay, stepping over the frozen infected. Row upon row of cryopods stretched out before them, most still intact. "Start the revival process for the key personnel," Alex ordered, moving to a control panel. "Prioritize virologists and geneticists." As Kira and Zane began the careful process of awakening selected crew members, Alex opened a comm channel. "Captain, we've secured the cryo bay. Yara's cold theory proved correct. We're reviving essential personnel now." Captain Nakamura's voice came through, tinged with relief. "Excellent work, Doctor. But we have a new problem. The infection has spread to the ship's primary systems. Life support is failing across multiple decks, and we're losing control of our trajectory." Alex's heart sank. "What are our options?" There was a pause before the captain responded. "We're considering a controlled shutdown of all non-essential systems. It would put the entire ship into a state of hibernation, crew included, while simultaneously creating an environment inhospitable to the pathogen." "A ship-wide cryosleep," Alex mused. "It could work, but the risks are enormous," the captain finished. "But it may be our only chance to save what's left of the crew and complete our mission." As Alex pondered this, a commotion from one of the revival stations caught his attention. Dr. Amelia Rossi, the ship's lead virologist, was emerging from her pod, confusion etched on her face. "Alex," she croaked, her voice hoarse from disuse. "What's happening? Why are we awake?" Alex took a deep breath, preparing to brief her on their dire situation. As he did, he couldn't shake the feeling that their next decisions would determine not just their fate, but potentially the future of humanity itself. "Dr. Rossi," he began, "we have a serious situation. An alien pathogen has been unleashed on the ship, and we need your expertise to fight it." As Amelia's eyes widened in understanding, alarms began to blare throughout the cryo bay. The ship's AI voice cut through the noise. "Warning, Critical system failure imminent. All personnel prepare for emergency protocols. Alex realized that their time was running out faster than they had anticipated. Whatever their next move was, they would have to make it quickly. The cryobay was a flurry of activity as newly awakened scientists were briefed on the situation. Dr. Rossi, still shaking off the effects of long-term stasis, had immediately taken charge of the research efforts. "We need samples, and we need them now," she barked, her voice growing stronger by the minute. "Infected tissue, blood work, anything you can get your hands on." Alex's calm crackled to life. "Alex, it's Yara. The situation in the medical bay is deteriorating. We're losing containment." He stepped away from the group, lowering his voice. "How bad?" "Bad," Yara replied, the sound of chaos in the background. "The cold slowed them down, but they're adapting, and we're running out of power to maintain the low temperatures." Alex closed his eyes, feeling the weight of command settling heavily on his shoulders. "All right, hold on as long as you can. We're working on a plan." He turned back to the group. "Dr. Rossi, we don't have much time. The captain is considering a ship-wide shutdown to buy us time and contain the infection. What do you think?" Amelia's brow furrowed. "It's risky, but it might be our best shot. If we can maintain a low enough temperature, it could slow the pathogen's spread and mutation rate, giving us time to develop a cure." "But," Alex prompted, sensing her hesitation. "But," she continued, "we'd need to keep a small team awake to continue the research. And we'd have to find a way to power the lab and maintain a habitable environment for them." Zane, who had been quietly working on his tablet, spoke up. "I might have a solution for that. The ship's fusion core is self-sustaining. If we can isolate it and reroute power to a single secure sector, we could maintain a research station indefinitely." Captain Nakamura's voice came through the comm system. "You'd better make it quick. We've got multiple hull breaches on the lower decks, and the navigation systems are going haywire. We're veering off course." Alex made a decision. "All right, here's the plan. Zane, you and Kira head to engineering. Secure the fusion core and set up the power reroute. Dr. Rossi, assemble your research team and gather everything you need. We'll set up in the auxiliary control room. It's designed to function as a lifeboat in emergencies." He turned to the rest of the awakened crew. "Everyone else, we need to prep the ship for long-term shutdown. Secure all loose equipment, seal off damaged sections, and make sure the cryopods are ready for immediate use." As the team dispersed to their tasks, Alex opened a channel to the bridge. "Captain, we're proceeding with the shutdown plan. How long can you give us?" 2 hours, came the terse reply. "After that, we lose control of the ship entirely." Alex nodded grimly. "Understood. We'll be ready." The next hour was a blur of frantic preparation. Alex coordinated between teams, helping where he could, and making tough decisions on the fly. They lost more crew to the infection, each loss a blow to morale, and a reminder of the stakes they faced. Finally, as the 2-hour mark approached, Alex found himself in the auxiliary control room with Dr. Rossi, her hastily assembled research team, and a handful of essential personnel. "All teams report ready," Zane's voice came through the comm. "Fusion core is isolated, and power is rerouted to your sector. We're heading back now." Alex took a deep breath. "Captain, we're as ready as we'll ever be. Initiate shutdown on your command." There was a moment of silence before Captain Nakamura's voice filled the room, broadcasting ship-wide. "Attention all crew of the Asteria. We face an unprecedented threat, one that endangers not just our mission, but potentially all of humanity. In response, we are initiating a ship-wide shutdown. Most of you will return to cryosleep. A small team will remain awake to find a cure. To those who sleep, we will wake you when it's safe. To those who stay awake, the fate of our species rests in your hands. May fortune favor the bold. Shutdown commencing in 60 seconds. As the countdown began, Alex looked around at the determined faces of his team. They were humanity's last hope, a small group of scientists and survivors trapped on a wounded ship hurtling through the void of space. The lights dimmed, and a chill began to fill the air as the ship's systems powered down. In the distance, they could hear the fading screams of the infected as the cold took hold. "Shutdown complete," the AI announced, its voice sounding weaker than before. "Auxiliary control room now on independent power. Good luck." As silence settled over the ship, Dr. Rossi turned to her team. "All right, people, let's get to work. We've got a world to save." And with that, their desperate race against time truly began. Days blended into weeks as the small team worked tirelessly in their isolated bubble of warmth and life. The rest of the Asteria had become a tomb of ice and silence, with only the occasional groan of settling metal to remind them they were on a spacecraft. Dr. Rossi barely slept, her eyes constantly red-rimmed as she pored over data and ran endless simulations. Alex split his time between assisting with research and maintaining their fragile haven. "I think we're making progress," Amelia said one morning, though the concept had little meaning in their timeless cocoon. "The pathogen's RNA structure is unlike anything I've ever seen, but there are patterns emerging." Alex nodded, trying to muster enthusiasm. "That's good news. Any estimate on when we might have a treatment?" Amelia's face fell slightly. "Weeks, maybe months. And that's assuming we can synthesize what we need with our limited resources." Before Alex could respond, an alarm blared through their sector. Zane rushed to a console, his fingers flying over the controls. "We've got a problem," he announced, his voice tense. "A micrometeoroid just punched through our hull. It's small, but it's causing a pressure leak." "Can we seal it?" Alex asked, already moving towards the equipment locker. Zane shook his head. "Not remotely. Someone's going to have to go out there." Alex's stomach dropped. Out there meant venturing into the frozen, possibly still infected areas of the ship. It was a risk they'd managed to avoid until now. "I'll go," he said, starting to don an environmental suit. "Zane, guide me. Kira, you're on standby in case something goes wrong." The journey through the ship was surreal. Alex's headlamp cut through the darkness, illuminating frozen tableaus of violence and desperation. Here and there, he saw the contorted forms of infected crew members, perfectly preserved in their final moments. "You're approaching the breach," Zane's voice crackled in his ear. "It should be just around the next corner." As Alex turned the corner, his light fell on a horrifying sight. A group of infected frozen mid-lunge, their faces twisted in eternal hunger, and behind them, barely visible, the winking of stars through a small, ragged hole. "I see it," Alex whispered, his breath fogging his helmet. "And Zane, the infected. They're here." There was a moment of tense silence before Zane replied. Just focus on the breach, Alex. They can't hurt you now." With shaking hands, Alex applied the emergency sealant to the hole. As he worked, he could have sworn he saw one of the frozen infected twitch. "It's done," he reported, backing away slowly. "I'm heading back." He had almost reached the safety of their sector when a low moan echoed through the corridor. Alex froze, his blood turning to ice. "Alex? What's happening?" Kira's voice came through, tight with concern. I think they're waking up," Alex whispered. "The exposure to space. It must have triggered something." He broke into a run as the sound of cracking ice and inhuman growls grew behind him. Alex burst through the airlock just as Kira sealed it shut, the faces of the reanimated infected pressed against the small window. As Alex collapsed to the floor, gasping, Dr. Rossi rushed over. "Are you all right? Were you exposed?" Alex shook his head, still trying to catch his breath. "No, I'm fine. But them..." He gestured towards the airlock. "They're adapting, evolving. The vacuum of space didn't kill them, it just made them dormant." The implications hung heavy in the air. Their safe haven was no longer as safe as they'd thought, and the enemy they faced was growing stronger. Dr. Rossi's face set in grim determination. Then we need to work faster. We're not just fighting for the crew anymore. If these things can survive in space, they could spread beyond our ship, Alex finished, the true horror of their situation sinking in. We might be carrying a pandemic that could wipe out not just humanity, but any world we come in contact with. As the team huddled together, the weight of their responsibility pressing down on them, Alex couldn't help but wonder. Were they humanity's last hope? Or were they now the greatest threat the galaxy had ever known? The next few weeks were a blur of frantic research and constant vigilance. The reanimated infected prowled the frozen corridors outside their sanctuary, a constant reminder of the threat they faced. Sleep became a luxury as the team worked around the clock, pushing the limits of their equipment and their own endurance. It was during one of these marathon sessions that Dr. Rossi's eyes suddenly widened, her fingers flying across her keyboard. "I think I've got something," she breathed, barely louder than a whisper. The team gathered around her station, hope and exhaustion warring on their faces. "Look here," Amelia pointed to a complex molecular model on her screen. "The pathogen's using our own cellular machinery against us, but it has a weakness. It relies on a specific protein to replicate." Alex leaned in, squinting at the display. "And if we can disrupt that protein, we could stop the infection in its tracks," Amelia finished, a hint of excitement creeping into her voice. "Better yet, I think we can use the ship's medical synthesizers to create a treatment." For the first time in weeks, a spark of real hope ignited in the room. But it was quickly tempered by reality. "We'll need to test it," Kira pointed out. "And for that, we need a live subject," Alex finished grimly. The implication hung heavy in the air. Someone would have to venture out into the infected areas of the ship and bring back a test subject. After a tense discussion, it was decided that Alex and Kira would go, while Zane coordinated from their safe zone, and Dr. Rossi prepared the first batch of the potential cure. Dressed in reinforced environmental suits, Alex and Kira made their way through the airlock and into the frozen wasteland of the ship's main corridors. The sounds of shuffling and distant moans echoed through the darkness. "There," Kira whispered, pointing her light at a lone figure stumbling at the end of the hallway. "That one's isolated. Should be easier to subdue." They approached cautiously, tranquilizer guns at the ready. The infected crew member, once a young engineer named Chen, Alex realized with a pang, turned towards them, eyes milky and unfocused. Just as they were about to fire, a blood-curdling shriek echoed from behind them. A group of infected rounded the corner, moving with terrifying speed. "Run!" Alex yelled, firing his tranquilizer at Chen as Kira provided covering fire. They sprinted back towards the airlock, dragging the unconscious infected with them. The pursuing horde gained ground with each step. "Zane! Get that airlock open now!" Kira shouted into her comm. They burst through the opening doors, the claws of the infected barely missing them as Zane sealed the airlock shut. The team collapsed to the floor, chests heaving. "We got one," Alex panted, gesturing to their unconscious captive. The next hours were tense as they secured the infected crew member in a makeshift containment area, and Dr. Rossi administered the treatment. All they could do now was wait and hope. As the hours ticked by, the changes were subtle at first. The infected skin began to regain its normal color. The constant twitching and moaning subsided. And then, after what felt like an eternity, Chen's eyes fluttered open, clear, focused, and unmistakably human. Where am I?" he croaked, confusion and fear evident in his voice. The team exchanged looks of stunned disbelief. It had worked. They had a cure. But their elation was short-lived, as alarms began to blare throughout their sector. Zane rushed to the console, his face paling as he read the display. "We've got a major problem," he announced, his voice shaking. "The ship's trajectory. We're approaching a planetary system. And at our current speed. We're going to crash," Alex finished, the weight of their situation crashing down on him. They had found a cure, but now they faced a new, potentially deadlier threat. Could they save the crew and prevent their ship from becoming a doomsday weapon for an unsuspecting world? The race against time had entered its final, most desperate phase. The auxiliary control room erupted into a flurry of activity. Zane's fingers flew across the console as he tried to access the ship's navigation systems. "Most of the controls are still locked down from the shutdown," he reported, frustration evident in his voice. "We don't have enough power to restart everything." Alex paced the room, his mind racing. "What about manual controls? Can we access the bridge?" Kira shook her head. "Even if we could get there, the bridge is probably full of infected. We'd be overrun before we could do anything." Dr. Rossi, who had been quietly monitoring Chen's recovery, spoke up. "What if we wake more of the crew? With the cure, we could revive key personnel to help us." "That could work," Alex nodded, a plan forming in his mind. "Zane, how long until impact?" Zane consulted the readouts. "At our current speed and trajectory, about 36 hours. Alex took a deep breath. "Okay, here's what we're going to do. Dr. Rossi, start mass producing the cure. Kira and I will make runs to the cryo bay to revive essential crew members. Zane, focus on getting us more power and control over the ship's systems." As they dispersed to their tasks, Alex couldn't shake a nagging feeling that they were missing something crucial. The next day was a blur of activity. Alex and Kira made multiple dangerous trips through the infected areas, bringing back key crew members to be cured and briefed. With each trip, the risk grew as the infected seemed to be growing more aggressive and organized. In the control room, newly revived engineers and pilots worked frantically alongside Zane to regain control of the ship. Progress was maddeningly slow, but bit by bit systems came back online. With just 6 hours left before impact, Captain Nakamura, now fully recovered, called a meeting of the senior staff. "What are our options?" she asked, her voice steady despite the dire circumstances. The ship's chief engineer, Commander Patel, spoke up. "We've managed to restart the primary engines, but our momentum is too great. The best we can do is attempt to alter our trajectory for a glancing blow rather than a direct impact. That would still cause catastrophic damage to the planet's surface," Kira pointed out. "What about ejecting the infected sections of the ship?" Alex suggested. "We could significantly reduce our mass." Dr. Rossi shook her head. "We can't be certain we found all the infected, if even one made it to the planet's surface." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. They had come so far, found a cure, but now faced the possibility of becoming the very thing they had fought so hard against, a threat to an entire world. Suddenly, Zane's eyes lit up. "Wait, I have an idea. It's risky, but it might be our only shot." All eyes turned to him as he explained his plan. It was dangerous, with a high chance of failure, but as the minutes ticked away, they realized it was their best hope. As the team rushed to implement Zane's plan, Alex found himself staring out a viewport at the looming planet. Blue oceans, swirling clouds, and green landmasses grew larger with each passing moment. A world teeming with life, blissfully unaware of the potential doom hurtling towards it. "Alex," Captain Nakamura's voice snapped him back to reality. "It's time. Are you ready?" He nodded, steeling himself for what was to come. As he made his way to his station, Alex couldn't help but reflect on the journey that had brought them here. From the terror of the initial outbreak to the triumph of finding a cure, it all came down to these final moments. The fate of not just their crew, but an entire world, perhaps even the future of humanity itself, rested on their shoulders. As the final countdown began, Alex closed his eyes and took a deep breath. It was time to find out if they could pull off one last miracle. The bridge of the Asteria hummed with tense energy as the crew worked feverishly to implement Zane's plan. The young tech specialist had proposed a daring maneuver, using the ship's fusion core to create a controlled antimatter reaction. The resulting explosion would alter their trajectory, just enough to miss the planet, while simultaneously destroying any remaining trace of the infection. Fusion core at maximum output, Commander Patel reported, her voice strained. Antimatter production at 60% and rising. Captain Nakamura nodded grimly. Initiate evacuation protocols. All non-essential personnel to the escape pods. As crew members rushed to their assigned stations, Alex found himself working alongside Dr. Rossi to ensure every escape pod was stocked with doses of the cure. Just in case, Amelia murmured, her eyes reflecting the gravity of their situation. The ship shuddered violently, causing everyone to stumble. Hull integrity at 72%, the AI announced dispassionately. Planetary atmosphere entry in 10 minutes. Antimatter production at 85%, Zane called out, his fingers dancing across his console. We're cutting it close, Captain. Nakamura's jaw clenched. Initiate final evacuation. Zane, Alex, Dr. Rossi, to your pods. Now. Alex hesitated, looking at the captain. What about you? Someone needs to stay to trigger the reaction manually, she replied, her voice leaving no room for argument. It's been an honor serving with all of you. Now go. As they rushed towards the escape pods, another violent tremor rocked the ship. Alex stumbled, slamming into a bulkhead. Pain exploded in his shoulder, and he felt warm blood trickle down his arm. Alex! Kira shouted, reaching for him. I'm fine, he gritted out, pushing through the pain. Keep moving. They reached the escape pod bay just as another alarm blared. Warning! Hull breach in sectors 7 through 12. Atmospheric decompression imminent. Alex helped Dr. Rossi into a pod, then turned to Zane and Kira. Go! I'll take the last one. As their pods launched, Alex sprinted for the final escape vessel. He was mere steps away when a deafening roar filled the air. The bulkhead behind him exploded inward, and he felt himself being pulled towards the breach. In a moment of desperation, Alex leaped for the escape pod. His injured arm screamed in protest as he caught the edge of the hatch, his legs dangling in the void. With a final surge of strength, he pulled himself inside and slammed the hatch shut. The pod ejected just as another explosion rocked the Asteria. Through the small viewport, Alex watched in awe and terror as the massive ship began to break apart, a dazzling display of light erupting from its core. The antimatter reaction had worked. The Asteria disintegrated in a spectacular burst of energy, its remains arcing away from the planet in a shower of luminescent particles. As his pod entered the planet's atmosphere, Alex's thoughts turned to his crewmates. Had they all made it? Would this new world accept them? And what of the infected sections of the ship? Had they truly been destroyed? The pod shuddered as it deployed parachutes, slowing its descent. Through the flames of re-entry, Alex caught glimpses of a vast ocean below, dotted with islands. With a jarring splash, the escape pod hit the water. As it bobbed on the alien sea, Alex activated the emergency beacon and slumped back, exhaustion overtaking him. They had done it. They had survived the outbreak, found a cure, and saved an entire world from infection. But as the adrenaline faded and the reality of their situation set in, Alex realized their journey was far from over. They were stranded on an alien world, the remnants of a crew carrying the weight of humanity's future on their shoulders. As the first rays of an alien sun peeked over the horizon, Alex allowed himself a small smile. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. They had survived the nightmare aboard the Asteria. Now, it was time to build a new future. As Alex drifted into an exhausted sleep, lulled by the gentle rocking of the waves, he dreamed of the possibilities that awaited them on this new world, and of the vigilance they would need to ensure that the horrors they had faced would never rise again. The end. Or perhaps, just the beginning.
Chapter 1. When the World Caught Fire. The day the dead started walking was the day I finally felt alive. Ironic, ain't it? Name's Jack Burner. Yeah, I know. Like the universe has a sick sense of humor. And I've always had a thing for fire. Not your run-of-the-mill fascination, mind you. We're talking full-blown, get-me-to-a-shrink pyromania. But let me tell you, when the shit hit the fan and zombies started gnawing on folks' faces, my condition finally became a lot less problematic. It started like any other Tuesday. I was sitting in my crappy apartment, flicking my Zippo open and closed, watching the flame dance. The TV droned on about some new virus. Whatever. I'd heard it all before. Then the screaming started. At first, I thought it was just the usual neighborhood ruckus, but it kept getting louder, more frantic. I dragged myself to the window, Zippo still in hand. Holy mother of... The street below was chaos. People running, shoving, falling. And behind them? Well, I'd seen enough late-night horror flicks to know what zombies looked like. But these are the real deal. And they were hungry. I stood there, transfixed, as a woman in a tattered business suit sank her teeth into a mailman's neck. The blood sprayed like a geyser, and something in my brain clicked. Fire. Fire would fix this. Before I knew it, I was in the kitchen, grabbing anything flammable. Cooking oil, air freshener, my secret stash of gasoline. Don't ask. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. No, this was excitement. I'd always known fire would save me someday. I rigged up a makeshift Molotov cocktail, something I'd only ever read about but never dared try. The shouts and moans were getting closer, feet pounding up the stairs. I opened my door just as Mrs. Halverson from 4B rounded the corner. Only it wasn't Mrs. Halverson anymore. Her eyes were milky white, her jaw hanging at an impossible angle. "Sorry, Mrs. H," I muttered, flicking my Zippo. The bottle sailed through the air into a beautiful arc. Time seemed to slow as it neared her face, then whoosh! The hallway erupted into flames. Mrs. Halverson, or what used to be her, shrieked and flailed, her undead flesh bubbling and charring. I stood in my doorway, watching the inferno spread. The heat flicked at my face, but I didn't flinch. This was my element. For the first time in my life, I felt right. As the flames consumed the hallway and the zombies that used to bake me cookies, I knew two things for certain. One, the world as we knew it was over. And two, I was finally going to fit right in. I gripped my Zippo tighter and grinned. The apocalypse had arrived, and brother, it was going to burn. Chapter 2. Baptism by Fire. I'd like to say I had a plan after torching Mrs. Halverson, but that would be a lie. Truth is, I stood there gawking at the flames like a moth to a... well, you get the idea. The fire alarm's shrill wail snapped me out of it. Shit, I muttered, suddenly remembering I lived in this tinderbox too. I grabbed my go bag, always prepared for the day I'd finally snap and burn the place down, and bolted. The stairwell was a smoky hell, but compared to what waited outside, it was a goddamn cakewalk. The street was like something out of this disaster flicks, only the special effects budget was through the roof. Cars overturned, people running and screaming, the air thick with panic and copper stench of blood. And the zombies. Jesus H. Christ, the zombies. They shuffled and lurched, faces slack, eyes empty. But don't let the movies fool you. These bastards could move when they wanted to. I watched one take down a guy built like a linebacker, ripping into his gut like it was an all-you-can-eat buffet. My stomach lurched, but a sick part of me couldn't look away. That's when I noticed something peculiar. The zombies. They were avoiding the burning wreckage of a car down the block, shying away from the flames like they were afraid. A light bulb went off in my head, brighter than the inferno I'd left behind. Fire. It wasn't just my obsession anymore. It was my ticket to survival. I clutched my bag tighter and started moving, keeping close to the burning debris when I could. My eyes darted around, cataloging everything flammable. In this new world, a dumpster wasn't trash. It was kindling. An abandoned car wasn't a wreck. It was a potential explosion. As I rounded the corner, I came face to face with one of them. A kid. Couldn't have been more than 16. His varsity jacket was soaked in blood, and half of his face, well, let's just say he wouldn't be winning any beauty pageants. He lunged at me, teeth bared. I stumbled back, fumbling for my Zippo. My back hit a wall, and for a second, I thought this was it. Death by a teenage zombie. What a way to go. But my finger found the lighter, and muscle memory took over. Click, flame, whoosh. I don't know if it was luck or some twisted divine intervention, but my hand knocked over a bottle of cheap booze some poor bastard had dropped into the chaos. The liquor caught fire, and suddenly, the zombie kid was engulfed. He screamed, honest to God screamed, and thrashed around like a marionette with tangled strings. I watched, mesmerized. As the flames consumed him, the smell was awful, like burning pork and rot. But I couldn't look away. When it was over, when the zombie was nothing but a smoldering heap on the pavement, I realized I was laughing like a lunatic in a world gone mad. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, tasting salt. Sweat or tears, I couldn't tell. Didn't matter. What mattered was that I was alive, and I'd found my weapon against the apocalypse. As sirens wailed in the distance and smoke billowed over the city, I gripped my Zippo and grinned. The world was burning, and for once in my miserable life, I was ready for it. Let it all burn. I'd dance in the ashes. Chapter 3. The Burning Man. 3 days into the apocalypse, and I was already a legend. The Burning Man, they called me. Fitting, I suppose. I'd made my way to the outskirts of the city, leaving a trail of charred zombies in my wake. My arsenal had grown, a backpack full of accelerants, a belt of Molotov cocktails, and a jury-rigged flamethrower strapped to my arm. I was a walking inferno, and for once in my life, that felt right. It was near the old industrial park that I found them. A group of survivors holed up in an abandoned warehouse. They'd barricaded the doors with shelving units and old machinery. But I wouldn't hold forever. The moans of the undead echoed from all sides. I watched from the roof of a nearby building, weighing my options. I could slip away, continue on my own. But something tugged at me. Maybe it was the sight of the kids huddled behind the adults. Maybe it was just boredom. Either way, I found myself reaching for my flamethrower. "Hey, dickheads!" I shouted, my voice raw from disuse. "How about a barbecue?" The zombies turned, drawn by the sound. I grinned, feeling the familiar rush as I squeezed the trigger. A stream of liquid fire arced through the air, catching the first wave of undead. They went up like torches, flailing and screaming. I laughed, drunk on the heat and destruction. "Come on, you ugly bastards! Who wants some?" They came at me in droves, and I met them with fire. The air filled with the stench of burning flesh and the crackle of flames. It was beautiful. It was terrible. It was home. When it was over, when the last zombie had fallen and the fires were dying down, I realized the survivors were staring at me. Fear and awe mingled in their eyes. A man stepped forward, his face streaked with soot and sweat. What are you?" I twirled my Zippo, considering the question. Who was I? A psycho with a fetish for flame? A hero forged in the crucible of the apocalypse? Maybe both? Maybe neither. I smiled, tasting ash on my lips. Just a guy who likes to watch the world burn. As I stepped towards them, the heat of the dying fire at my back, I knew only one thing for certain. In this new world of the dead, I had finally found my place among the living. And God help anyone, living or dead, who tried to take it from me. Chapter 4. Uneasy Alliances. The survivors eyed me wearily as I approached, the smell of smoke and charred flesh clinging to me like a second skin. Can't say I blame them. I must have looked like hell incarnate, covered in soot and grinning like a madman. "Name is Jack," I said, holstering my flamethrower. "Jack Burner." A woman with steely eyes and a shotgun stepped forward. "I'm Sarah. That was, impressive and terrifying." I shrugged. "It's a terrifying world now, sweetheart." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't call me sweetheart." I liked her already. The group introduced themselves. A mismatched bunch of office workers, students, and a couple of ex-military types. They'd been holed up for days, running low on food and hope. "We've got to move," Sarah said. "This place won't hold much longer." I nodded, scanning the horizon. Pillars of smoke rose in the distance, a grim map of the city's fall. I might know a place, old steel mill on the river. Defendable, lots of fuel. The group exchanged glances. I could see the debate in their eyes. Trust a pyromaniac stranger or take their chances alone. Finally, a grizzled old man spoke up. Beats staying here to be zombie chow. And just like that, I had a team. We moved out at dusk, a ragtag caravan of survivors. I took point, Zippo in one hand, flamethrower prime in the other. The city was a wasteland. Storefronts shattered, cars abandoned, and everywhere the shuffling dead. We skirted around the larger hordes, but conflict was inevitable. When it came, it was swift and brutal. I'd light them up, and the others would pick off the stragglers. We worked well together, I had to admit. As we approached the steel mill, I felt a twinge of something. Responsibility? Concern? Foreign emotions for a guy who'd spent his life not giving a damn about anyone. Home sweet home, I muttered as the mill's silhouette loomed before us. Sarah came up beside me, her shotgun at the ready. You sure about this place? I flicked my Zippo open, watching the flame dance. Honey, if there's one thing I'm sure about, it's where to find the best kindling. She rolled her eyes, but couldn't hide a smirk. Let's hope your firebug skills are good for more than just barbecuing zombies. As we approached the mill's gates, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could ditch these people, go back to my solitary life of pyromania and survival. Or I could stay, protect them, maybe even find some screwed up version of redemption. I looked back at the group, tired, scared, but alive. Then at the flame in my hand. All right, folks, I said, snapping the Zippo shut. Welcome to Fort Inferno. Let's make this place burn bright. Little did I know, the real Inferno was yet to come, and it would test not just my skills with fire, but the very core of who I was, or who I would become. Chapter 5. The Siege of Fort Inferno. Weeks passed, and Fort Inferno became a beacon of hope in the wasteland. We fortified the mill, rigging flame traps and fuel lines around the perimeter. I taught the survivors the art of controlled burns and makeshift explosives. For the first time in my life, my obsession was saving lives instead of destroying them. But our success didn't go unnoticed. It started with a trickle of new survivors, drawn by the smoke and rumors of safety. Then came the hordes, waves of undead crashing against our fiery defenses. We held them off, but each attack left us weaker, our fuel supplies dwindling. That's when we spotted them. Not zombies, but the living. A gang of marauders, armed to the teeth and eyeing our fortress with greedy eyes. They'd united the hordes, using them as cannon fodder to weaken us. They'll be coming for us soon, Sarah said, her face grim in the firelight. I nodded, feeling the weight of the leadership I'd never asked for. Then, we'll give them a show they'll never forget. We worked through the night, preparing for our last stand. As dawn broke, the attack began. Zombies flooded toward us, with the marauders driving them forward. Our outer defenses fell quickly, flames sputtering out as the undead pressed on, heedless of the fire. I stood atop the main building, flamethrower in hand, watching our world burn. Sarah was beside me, as always, her shotgun blazing. Any last words, Burner? She shouted over the chaos. I grinned, despite everything. Just getting warmed up, sweetheart. As the horde breached our inner walls, I knew it was time for the final play. I'd rigged the entire complex to blow. A failsafe I'd hoped we'd never need. One spark, and Fort Inferno would live up to its name. I looked at Sarah, saw the understanding in her eyes. She nodded, gripping my hand. I flicked my trusty Zippo one last time, savoring the flame. Let's light it up. Chapter 6. From the Ashes. The explosion was magnificent, a towering inferno that consumed zombies, marauders, and Fort Inferno alike. In those final moments, as fire rained down and the world burned orange, I felt a strange peace, then darkness. I awoke to the sound of lapping water. I was on a boat, a small fishing trawler, drifting down the river. Sarah sat nearby, bandaging a nasty burn on her arm. Welcome back to the land of the living, she said, relief evident in her voice. I tried to sit up, wincing at the pain. The others? Her face fell. Some made it to the escape boats. Most didn't. The weight of it hit me hard. All those lives gone because of my plan, my fire. "Hey," Sarah said softly, reading my thoughts. "You saved us. Gave us a fighting chance." I stared at my hands, scarred and blistered. The hands of a destroyer, but also a protector. Maybe even a hero in this messed up world. "So," I croaked, "where to now, sweetheart?" Sarah smiled, pointing downstream. "I heard rumors of a settlement up north. Figured we could check it out. Maybe help them fireproof the place." I felt a chuckle bubble up, surprising myself. "Sounds like a plan. Think they need a slightly crispy pyromaniac and his shotgun-toting partner?" "If they don't, we'll make them an offer they can't refuse," she said with a wink. As we drifted towards an uncertain future, I realized something. The old world had burned away, taking with it the person I used to be. From those ashes, something new had arisen. Someone who could use his curse as a gift, who could build as well as destroy. I took out my Zippo, miraculously intact, and flicked it open. The small flame danced in the breeze, a reminder of the inferno we'd survived, and the fire is yet to come. "Ready to set the world on fire?" I asked Sarah. She leaned in, her eyes reflecting the flame. "Always." And with that, we sailed on, two phoenixes rising from the ashes of the apocalypse, ready to face whatever burned on the horizon.
The clock on my nightstand blinked 3:17 a.m. when the emergency alert jolted me awake. The harsh buzz of my phone was followed by the blaring of my TV, which had switched on by itself. Groggy and confused, I fumbled for the remote, but froze as I registered the scene on the screen. Static flickered across the image, distorting what should have been a standard emergency broadcast. Through the interference, I could make out a pale-faced news anchor, his eyes wide with barely contained panic. His voice came through in broken fragments.
"Stay in your homes. Reports of violence. Unknown contagion. Do not approach."
The image cut to shaky footage of a city street. Even through the grainy quality and constant static, I could see figures shambling in the darkness. A scream pierced through the white noise, abruptly cut short. The broadcast dissolved into a garbled mess of images, glimpses of chaos, flashing emergency lights, and things I couldn't quite comprehend. Just before the signal was lost completely, the news anchor reappeared. Blood trickled from his nose as he leaned close to the camera, his voice suddenly clear.
"God help us all."
The TV went black. In the sudden silence, I heard a distant siren, followed by the unmistakable sound of breaking glass somewhere down the street. The siren's wail grew fainter, replaced by an eerie silence that hung over the neighborhood. I stood frozen by the window, peering through a gap in the blinds. The streetlights cast long shadows, and an overturned trash can spilled its contents across the sidewalk. A flicker of movement caught my eye. A figure stumbled into view, moving with an unnatural gait. Even from a distance, something seemed off. Their clothes were torn and dirty, and they swayed as if drunk or injured. Against my better judgment, I cracked open the front door. "Hey," I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the quiet street. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The figure turned, and I felt my blood run cold. In the dim light, I could see that half their face was wrong. Torn flesh hung from their cheek, and one eye bulged unnaturally. They let out a guttural moan that raised the hair on the back of my neck. As I watched in horror, the thing that used to be human lurched toward me with surprising speed. Its jaw worked furiously, teeth gnashing as it closed the distance. I slammed the door shut just as it reached the porch steps. The hollow thud of a body hitting wood echoed through the house, followed by frantic scratching and pounding. My heart raced as I fumbled to lock the door, my hands shaking. The thing outside howled, a sound of hunger and rage that was quickly joined by other voices in the darkness. As the chorus of inhuman cries grew, one thought burned in my mind. What I'd just seen was only the beginning. The next few hours were a blur of frantic news reports and social media chaos. My phone buzzed constantly with updates, each more terrifying than the last. Reports flooded in from all over the city. Mass riots downtown. Avoid hospitals, they're overrun. My neighbor just attacked his wife. His eyes were wrong. Shaky video clips showed scenes of carnage, streets littered with abandoned cars, storefronts with shattered windows, and always those shambling figures in the background, their numbers growing. A live stream from City Hall cut out abruptly as something lunged at the reporter. The image of her terrified face stayed with me, burned into my retinas. The government tried to maintain order. National Guard troops rolled into the city, their convoys visible from my window. A stern-faced general appeared on TV, urging calm and promising containment, but the fear in his eyes betrayed the truth. They were as lost as the rest of us. My phone pinged with an incoming text. It was from my best friend, Alex.
They're everywhere. I'm trapped at work. If you're safe, stay there. Don't trust anyone. They look normal until they're not.
As I read the message, the power flickered and died. In the sudden darkness, I heard glass breaking somewhere in the house. A low, hungry moan drifted up from downstairs. I wasn't alone anymore. Heart pounding, I barricaded myself in the attic, listening to the shuffling footsteps and inhuman groans below. As dawn broke, I dared to peek out the small window. The street was a war zone, overturned cars, smashed windows, and dark stains on the pavement I didn't want to think about. A flash of movement caught my eye. A group of people, living, uninfected people, were making their way down the street, armed with whatever they could find. I recognized my neighbor, Sarah, clutching a baseball bat. I called out to them, and after some tense moments of verification that I wasn't infected, they helped me escape my house. Together, we made our way to the local high school. Others had the same idea. A growing group of survivors was fortifying the building. The next few days were a blur of activity. Barricading doors and windows, scavenging for food and supplies, setting up a makeshift infirmary. We established rules. No one goes out alone. Any bite, no matter how small, means isolation. Conserve resources. We don't know how long this will last, but as days turned to weeks, tensions rose. Food was running low. People argued over leadership and distribution of supplies. Worst of all, the infected seemed to be growing smarter, testing our defenses with increasing frequency. One night, as I took my turn on watch, I overheard a hushed conversation between two survivors who had military backgrounds. They spoke of rumors, whispers of government experiments gone wrong, of a cure being withheld. As I strained to hear more, a piercing scream cut through the night. The infected had breached our perimeter. Our safe haven wasn't safe anymore. As chaos erupted around us, I found myself separated from the main group. Desperate to escape the horde of infected pouring into the school, I ducked into an abandoned classroom. There, huddled in the dark, I stumbled upon something that would change everything. A laptop, still running on battery power, sat open on a desk. Its screen flickered with an open email, apparently from a government official to a local scientist. My blood ran cold as I read, "Project Lazarus must remain confidential. The nanotech was never meant for civilian application. Containment is our top priority. If word gets out about the true nature of this virus, panic will..." The pieces started falling into place. This wasn't a natural outbreak. It was engineered, a twisted experiment in human reanimation gone horribly wrong. As I dug deeper into the files on the laptop, the full horror of the situation became clear. The zombies were humans reanimated by experimental nanobots. The infection spread as the nanobots sought new hosts. There was no cure. The changes were irreversible. Worst of all, I found a map detailing the spread of the infection. It wasn't just our city. The entire country, maybe even the world, was falling. A noise at the door snapped me back to reality. The infected were closing in. I grabbed the laptop, knowing its information could be crucial, and looked for a way out. As I climbed through a broken window, a terrible thought struck me. If the government had been willing to cover this up, how far would they go to keep their secret? Were we fighting against not only the infected, but also those who had caused this catastrophe? With the weight of this knowledge bearing down on me, I ran into the night, searching for any survivors I could trust with the truth. Days blurred together as I moved from hiding place to hiding place, always one step ahead of the infected, and those I suspected were trying to keep the truth buried. The laptop's battery had long since died, but I'd memorized its crucial information. Eventually, I found my way back to a handful of survivors from the school, including Sarah. When I shared what I'd learned, their reactions ranged from disbelief to rage. But as we compared notes on the strange behavior of military units we'd encountered, a grim acceptance set in. We decided to make a stand, not just against the infected, but against those responsible for this nightmare. Our plan was desperate. Reach the nearest military command center, broadcast the truth, and hope that someone out there could use the information to find a way to stop the nanobots. Our journey was harrowing. The infected seemed to be evolving, showing signs of coordination we hadn't seen before. We lost people along the way, each death a knife to the heart. Finally, we reached the command center. It was a fortified compound crawling with armed guards. Using every ounce of cunning and the last of our supplies, we managed to infiltrate the facility. We fought our way to the communications room, barricading ourselves inside. As Sarah and the others held off the soldiers trying to break in, I frantically worked to broadcast our message and the data from the laptop. Just as I hit transmit, the door burst open. Gunfire erupted and I felt a searing pain in my side. As my vision blurred, I saw the screens around us light up with incoming responses. Our message had gotten through. In those final moments, as chaos engulfed us, I caught a glimpse of a reply. Message received. Nanobot shutdown sequence initiated. A wave of relief washed over me. Then darkness. I don't know if I'm alive or dead as I recall this. Perhaps the nanobots claimed me in those last seconds. Perhaps I'm in a government facility being debriefed or worse. Or maybe, just maybe, that shutdown sequence worked, and somewhere out there the world is beginning to heal. All I know is that the truth is out there now, and in the end, that's what matters.
Chapter 1. Frozen Secrets. Dr. Sarah Chen's breath frosted in the frigid air as she peered through the electron microscope. Her fingers, numb despite the lab's heating, adjusted the focus with practiced precision. The sample in the slide was unremarkable to the naked eye. Just a few specks of dirt from the permafrost core they'd extracted last week. But at this magnification, Sarah saw something that made her breath catch. "Holy shit," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of equipment. "Marcus, come look at this." Dr. Marcus Emerson abandoned his computer station and hurried over. "What is it, Sarah? Please tell me you found something interesting. I'm dying of boredom over here." Sarah stepped back from the microscope, gesturing for Marcus to take a look. As he leaned in, she explained, "I think we just discovered a novel virus, and if I'm right about its structure, it could be ancient. I mean really ancient." Marcus whistled low as he examined the sample. "Incredible. The capsid structure. I've never seen anything like it. How old do you think?" Hard to say without further analysis, but given the depth of the core sample, we could be looking at something that predates human civilization. Sarah's excitement was palpable, her earlier fatigue forgotten. "We need to alert the rest of the team. This could be the discovery of the decade." As Marcus straightened up, his elbow knocked against a tray of petri dishes. Sarah lunged to steady it, but one dish slipped free, hitting the floor with a crack. The lid popped open, exposing the sample inside. "Shit!" Marcus exclaimed, jumping back. "I'm so sorry, Sarah. Did we just lose the sample?" Sarah was already moving, grabbing a containment kit from the nearby shelf. "It's okay. We can salvage this. Help me get it under the hood, quick." As they worked to contain the spill, neither scientist noticed the fine mist that had briefly risen from the broken dish. Invisible particles hung in the air, drawn into the ventilation system that cycled throughout the entire research station. Hours later, Sarah sat in the station's small cafeteria, nursing a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Her head throbbing, a dull ache that she attributed to too many hours hunched over the microscope. Across the table, Dr. Yuki Tanaka scrolled through the preliminary data on her tablet, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The genetic sequence is like nothing I've ever seen," Yuki murmured. "It's as if this virus evolved along a completely different path from anything in our databases." Sarah nodded, wincing at the movement. "That's what makes it so fascinating. Imagine what we could learn about the evolution of viruses, of life itself." A crash from the kitchen made them both jump. They turned to see Jim, one of the station's cooks, leaning heavily against the counter. Pots and pans lay scattered around his feet. "Jim?" Sarah called out, concerned. "Are you all right?" The cook turned towards her voice, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. His skin had a grayish pallor, and when he opened his mouth, only a low, guttural moan emerged. Sarah stood slowly, every instinct screaming that something was terribly wrong. "Yuki," she said quietly, "I think we should go, now." As they backed towards the exit, Jim lurched forward, his eyes wild and unfocused, his teeth snapping together, biting at the air as if stumbling towards them with increasing speed. Sarah's mind raced. The virus, the containment breach, Jim's symptoms. A horrifying possibility began to take shape, and she and Yuki fled the cafeteria, the sound of Jim's inhuman snarls echoing behind them. Sarah realized their chance discovery might have just become a nightmare. The door slammed behind them, but Sarah knew it was only the beginning. Whatever was happening to Jim was almost certainly spreading throughout the station. They needed to alert the others, to contain this before it went any further. But as alarms began to blare and panicked shouts echoed down the corridors, Sarah feared they might already be too late. Chapter 2. Outbreak. The shrill wail of the station's alarm system pierced the air as Sarah and Yuki raced down the corridor. Red emergency lights cast an eerie glow, transforming the familiar hallways into something alien and threatening. "We need to get to the secure lab," Sarah shouted over the noise. "It's our best chance to figure out what's happening and to contain this thing." Yuki nodded, her face pale with shock. "What about the others? We can't just leave them out here." Before Sarah could respond, a blood-curdling scream echoed from around the corner. They skidded to a halt as Dr. Alexei Volkov came into view, running full tilt. Behind him, two figures pursued with speed that seemed impossible given their jerky, uncoordinated movements. "Inside, now!" Sarah yelled, yanking open the door to a supply closet. The three scientists piled in, slammed the door shut just as their pursuers reached it. The metal rattled as bodies slammed against it repeatedly. In the dim light of Yuki's phone, Sarah could see the terror on Alexei's face. "What's happening?" he gasped between ragged breaths. "Cooper and Chen, they just attacked me. Their eyes, they weren't human anymore." Sarah's mind raced. It's the virus. It must be. But the rate of transmission, the speed of onset, it's unprecedented. She turned to Yuki. "We need to get to the secure lab. It's the only place with this equipment to analyze this thing and maybe find a way to stop it." The pounding on the door intensified. "They're gonna break through," Yuki whispered, her voice trembling. Sarah scanned the small space, her gaze landing on a vent near the ceiling. "There," she pointed. "The ventilation system. It can get us to the lab without going back out there." Working quickly, they removed the vent cover. Alexei gave Sarah and Yuki a boost, then scrambled up after them just as the door began to splinter. The journey through the vents was claustrophobic and terrifying. Every distant scream or thud made them freeze, afraid the infected would somehow reach them. After what felt like hours, they finally reached the secure lab. As they dropped down into the room, Sarah immediately moved to seal the entrance. "We should be safe here for now," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "The security protocols are designed to withstand pretty much anything." Alexei slumped against a wall, his face ashen. "Safe? Look around you, Sarah. We're trapped in here, while God knows what is happening to everyone else out there." "He's right," Yuki added softly. "What are we going to do?" Sarah took a deep breath, forcing herself to think rationally. "First, we need to understand exactly what we're dealing with. Yuki, start analyzing the genetic sequence of the virus. Look for anything that might explain its method of transmission and how it's affecting human physiology." She turned to Alexei. "I need you to try to establish communication with the outside world. Use the emergency channels if you have to. We need to alert authorities about what's happening here." As her colleagues set to work, Sarah moved to a computer terminal. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she assessed the station's security feeds. Most of the cameras were offline, but the few still functioning painted a grim picture. Infected personnel roamed the halls, their movements becoming more coordinated with each passing minute. In one feed, she watched in horror as a group of them worked together to break down a barricaded door. A beeping from her station drew her attention. It was an incoming transmission from the Alaskan mainland. Sarah's relief at the prospect of rescue quickly turned to dread as she read the message. "Oh no," she breathed. Yuki looked up from her work. "What is it?" Sarah's voice was hollow as she replied. "It's from the military command. They've designated us a level 5 biohazard threat. Their solution is to eliminate the threat entirely." "What does that mean?" Alexei asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Sarah met their eyes, her expression grimmed. "It means they're going to bomb the entire station. We have less than 24 hours before this place becomes a crater." The weight of her words hung in the air, accompanied by the distant sounds of the infected trying to break into their sanctuary. They were trapped between the nightmare outside and the ticking clock of their own annihilation. Sarah realized that their next decisions would determine not just their own fate, but potentially that of all humanity. "We need a plan," she said, her voice steadying with resolve, "and we need it fast." Chapter 3. Race Against Time. The secure lab hummed with nervous energy as Sarah, Yuki, and Alexei worked feverishly. Hours had passed since they'd received the bombing ultimatum, each minute bringing them closer to annihilation. Sarah hunched over a microscope, studying tissue samples they'd managed to collect before barricading themselves in. Her eyes burned from their fatigue, but she couldn't afford to rest, not when every second counted. "I think I've found something," Yuki called out, her voice cutting through the tense silence. Sarah and Alexei rushed to her station. Yuki pointed to her screen, displaying a complex genetic sequence. The virus is unlike anything we've seen before. It's not just hijacking cells, it's rewriting human DNA at an unprecedented rate. That's why the infected spread so quickly, and the symptoms appeared almost immediately. Sarah's mind raced with the implications. If it's altering DNA that dramatically, it could explain the physical and behavioral changes we've observed. But how is it spreading so efficiently? Alexei, who had been monitoring the security feeds, spoke up. "I think I have an answer for that." He gestured to a screen showing grainy footage of the cafeteria. "Watch closely." They observed as an infected individual entered the room, its movements jerky but purposeful. Suddenly, it convulsed, expelling a fine mist from its mouth and nose. Moments later, 2 uninfected people who had been hiding under a table began to show symptoms. "It's airborne," Sarah whispered, horror dawning on her face. "And the infected are actively spreading it. This is worse than we thought." A loud bang from the sealed door made them all jump. The infected outside had been trying to break in periodically, but this impact was different, more coordinated, more powerful. "They're getting smarter," Alexei said, his voice tight with fear. "Working together, I don't know how long the door will hold." Sarah took a deep breath, forcing herself to focus. "Okay, we need to prioritize Yuki. Keep working on understanding the virus. If we can figure out how it's rewriting DNA, we might be able to develop a treatment or vaccine." She turned to Alexei. "We need a way out of here. Bombing is going to happen whether we're ready or not. See if you can access the station's structural plans. Look for any escape routes they might have overlooked." As her colleagues set to work, Sarah returned to her own station. She had been attempting to synthesize a potential treatment based on their preliminary findings, but progress was agonizingly slow. Hours ticked by, punctuated by increasingly violent attempts by the infected to breach their sanctuary. Sarah's hands shook from exhaustion and too much caffeine as she handled another sample. Suddenly, Yuki let out a triumphant shout. "I've got it! The virus isn't just rewriting DNA. It's activating dormant genes. Prehistoric genes that humans evolved past millions of years ago." Sarah's eyes widened as she processed this information. So it's not turning people into monsters. It's reverting them to a more primitive state of human evolution. That's incredible and terrifying. It gets worse, Yuki continued grimly. The virus is still evolving. Each new infection allows it to refine its process. If it spreads beyond the station, it could send humanity back to the Stone Age, Alexei finished, his face pale. Before they could discuss further, a deafening crash shook the lab. The reinforced door buckled inward, stressed metal screaming as inhuman strength assaulted it from other side. "We're out of time," Sarah shouted over the noise. "Alexei, please tell me you found a way out." He nodded, pointed to a schematic on his screen. "There's a maintenance tunnel that leads to the surface. It's not on the main plans. Probably forgotten when they expanded the station. But it's our only shot." Sarah made a split-second decision. "Grab everything you can. Research samples, all of it. We can't let this work be destroyed." As Yuki and Alexei hurriedly packed essential equipment and data drives, Sarah retrieved the experimental treatment she'd been working on. It was untested, potentially dangerous, but it was all they had. The door gave way with a final thunderous crash just as they pried open a hidden panel leading to the maintenance tunnel. Sarah caught a glimpse of twisted, snarling faces before she pulled the panel shut behind them. The tunnel was cramped and dark, lit only by the glow of their phone screens. They crawled forward, acutely aware of the infected howls echoing behind them and the countdown to bombardment ticking away in their heads. As they neared the surface exit, a bone-chilling realization struck Sarah. Even if they made it out, how could they be sure they weren't already infected? And if they were, what horrors might they unleash upon the outside world? With trembling hands, she uncapped the syringe containing her experimental treatment. "We can't risk spreading this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "We have to use the treatment. It's the only way to be sure." Alexei and Yuki exchanged worried glances, but nodded in agreement. One by one, they injected themselves with the unproven formula, each knowing it could kill them as easily as save them. As the cold Alaskan air hit their faces at the tunnel's exit, Sarah felt a wave of dizziness wash over her. Whether from the treatment, fear, or the first signs of infection, she couldn't tell. In the distance, the low rumble of approaching aircraft could be heard. The race to escape, and to save humanity, had only just begun. Chapter 4. Into the Wild. The frigid Alaskan wind bit into Sarah's exposed skin as she emerged from the maintenance tunnel. The vast, snow-covered landscape stretched before them, beautiful and terrifying in its emptiness. Behind them, the research station loomed like a tomb. "We need to move," Alexei said, his breath forming clouds in the cold air. "Those bombers will be here any minute." As if on cue, the distant rumble of aircraft engines grew louder. Sarah's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan through the haze of exhaustion and the strange tinging sensations spreading through her body. A side effect of the experimental treatment, she hoped. "There," Yuki pointed, her voice shaking slightly. "The emergency shelter. It's our best chance." About a half-mile away, a small, reinforced structure stood out against the white backdrop. It was designed as a last resort in case of severe weather or other catastrophes. Now, it might be their only hope for survival. They set off at a stumbling run, weighed down by the equipment and samples they'd managed to salvage. The sound of the bombers grew steadily louder, a countdown to destruction spurring them on. Halfway to the shelter, Sarah's legs gave out. She crashed to her knees in the snow, gasping for breath. The tingling had intensified, spreading to every nerve ending. "Sarah!" Yuki cried, turning back to help her. "No!" Sarah wheezed. "Keep going, I'll catch up." Alexei appeared at her side, ignoring her protests. He hoisted her up, supporting her weight. "We're not leaving anyone behind," he said grimly. They pressed on, moving as fast as they could through the deep snow. The shelter loomed closer. Just as they reached the structure's heavy metal door, the world behind them erupted in fire and thunder. The force of the explosion knocked them off their feet, sending them sprawling into the snow. Sarah's ears rang as she struggled to her knees. Through blurred vision, she saw the research station engulfed in flames, black smoke billowing into the sky. The infected, their colleagues, everything they'd left behind. All of it was gone in an instant. "Inside, now!" Alexei shouted, his voice muffled and distant. They scrambled inside the shelter, sealing the door behind them just as a wave of heat and debris washed over the area. The structure shuddered but held firm. In the dim emergency lighting of the structure, the three scientists collapsed, gasping for breath. For a long moment, no one spoke, the reality of their situation sinking in. Finally, Yuki broke the silence. What do we do now?" Sarah forced herself to sit up, fighting against the strange sensation coursing through her body. "We need to assess our situation, check supplies, see what equipment survived. And," she hesitated, "we need to monitor ourselves for signs of infection." Alexei nodded grimly. "The treatment, do you think it worked?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "We're not showing the same symptoms as the others. At least, not yet." They set about taking inventory of their meager supplies. The shelter was stocked with basic rations and first aid equipment, enough to last a few weeks if they were careful. More importantly, most of their salvaged research equipment had survived the mad dash to safety. As night fell, bringing with it plummeting temperatures, they huddled around a small heater. Outside, the wind howled, carrying with it the acrid smell of smoke from the destroyed research station. Sarah's mind whirled with questions and half-formed plans. They had survived, but for how long? The virus was still out there, possibly evolving even now in ways they couldn't predict. What about other pockets of survivors from the station? Could some of the infected have survived the bombing? A sudden spasm racked her body, causing her to double over in pain. Yuki and Alexei were at her side in an instant, their faces etched with concern. "Sarah, what's happening?" Yuki asked, her voice tight with fear. As the spasm passed, Sarah looked at her colleagues. What she saw made her blood run cold. In the dim light, their eyes seemed to glow with an otherworldly luminescence. "Your eyes," she whispered. "They're changing." Alexei grabbed a small mirror from the first aid kit. What they saw reflected back at them was both fascinating and terrifying. Their eyes had indeed changed, developing a faint, bioluminescent quality. But more than that, their pupils had elongated slightly, reminiscent of a predator's gaze. "The treatment," Alexei breathed. "It's not stopping the virus, it's adapting it." Sarah's scientific mind kicked into overdrive, pushing past the fear. "We're not regressing like the others, we're evolving. The treatment must have altered the virus's effects somehow." Yuki's hand shook as she reached for her tablet, calling up their research data. "If we're changing, but still rational, still ourselves, we might be the key to understanding this thing, stopping it." A new determination settled over the group. They were no longer just survivors. They were the last line of defense against a threat that could end humanity as they knew it. As the long Arctic night deepened around their shelter, Sarah, Yuki, and Alexei bent over their equipment, racing to unravel the mystery of their own transformation. Outside, in the frozen wasteland, something moved in the darkness. A shadow that shouldn't exist. A remnant of the nightmare they thought they'd left behind. Their ordeal, it seemed, was far from over. Chapter 5. Evolution. Days blended into nights as Sarah, Yuki, and Alexei worked tirelessly in the confines of their shelter. The changes in their bodies continued, subtle but undeniable. Enhanced night vision, improved reflexes, and a heightened sense of smell were just the beginning. Sarah stood before a makeshift mirror, examining her reflection. Her skin had taken on a slightly grayish hue, and fine, almost imperceptible scales had begun to form along her hairline. She flexed her hands, noting the increased strength and slight elongation of her nails. "Remarkable," she murmured, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. Yuki looked up from her workstation, where she'd been analyzing their latest blood samples. "The virus is rewriting our DNA at a cellular level, but it's like nothing what happened to the others. It's as if the treatment created a symbiosis between the virus and our bodies. Alexei joined them, his movements fluid and predatory in a way that would have been unsettling if Sarah hadn't been experiencing the same changes. "We're becoming something new," he said, his voice a mix of awe and trepidation. "But what?" Before anyone could respond, a loud thud from outside made them all freeze. They'd heard similar noises over the past few days, but had attributed them to the settling of snow and ice. This time, however, it was followed by an all-too-familiar growl. "Impossible," Yuki whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Nothing could have survived that bombing." Sarah moved silently to the small window, her enhanced night vision piercing the darkness outside. What she saw made her blood run cold. Several figures moved through the snow, their movements jerky yet purposeful. They were unmistakably infected, but they seemed different, more coordinated, more dangerous. "They've evolved too," Sarah said, her voice barely audible. "The bombing must have accelerated their mutations somehow." Alexei joined her at the window, his face grim. "They're hunting us. They can probably smell us from miles away." The reality of their situation sank in. They were trapped in a small shelter with limited supplies, surrounded by a hostile environment and an enemy that was growing stronger by the hour. "We need a plan," Yuki said, her voice steadier than Sarah expected. "We can't stay here forever." Sarah nodded, her mind racing. "You're right. We need to find a way to communicate with the outside world, to let them know what's happening here. But more importantly, we need to complete our research. If we can understand how the virus is changing us, we might be able to develop a true cure." As they discussed their options, a new sound cut through the howling wind, the rhythmic thud of helicopter blades. For a moment, hope surged through Sarah. Had help finally arrived? But as the sound grew closer, dread replaced hope. Through the window, they could see a black helicopter approaching, unmarked and menacing. It was clear this was no rescue mission. "They're here to clean up loose ends," Alexei said, his voice tight with anger, "to make sure nothing survives to threaten their precious secret." Sarah made a split-second decision. "Grab everything essential. We're leaving, now." They quickly packed their vital research materials and what supplies they could carry. As the helicopter landed in the distance, they slipped out the back of the shelter into the frigid night. The cold bit into their skin, but their altered physiology allowed them to withstand it better than before. They moved swiftly and silently through the snow, their enhanced senses alert for any signs of pursuit. Behind them, they could hear the shouts of armed men and snarls of the infected as the two groups clashed. The night erupted into gunfire and screams. As they crested a hill, Sarah paused to look back. The scene below was chaos. Trained soldiers fighting a losing battle against creatures that were once human. The helicopter lay on its side, flames licking at its fuselage. "We can't let either side win," Sarah said, her voice filled with grim determination. "If the infected spread, it's the end of humanity as we know it. But if those men take our research, who knows what horrors they might create." Yuki and Alexei nodded in agreement. They were no longer just scientists or survivors. They had become something else. Perhaps humanity's last hope, or its eventual successors. As they turned away from the battle and headed in the vast Alaskan wilderness, Sarah felt a strange sense of purpose. They were carrying not just the key to understanding the virus, but possibly the future of human evolution itself. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with danger. But as the first rays of dawn broke over the horizon, Sarah allowed herself a moment of hope. Whatever they had become, whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a new instinct stirred. Primitive yet evolved. Terrifying yet exhilarating. The hunt was on, and they were no longer the prey. Chapter 6. Wilderness. The Alaskan wilderness stretched endlessly before them. A stark white canvas painted with the muted colors of the aurora borealis. Sarah, Yuki, and Alexei had been on the move for days, their enhanced bodies allowing them to cover distances that would have been impossible for normal humans. They paused atop a snow-covered ridge, scanning the horizon with their heightened senses. The wind carried no scent of pursuers, but they remained vigilant. Their transformation had continued, bringing with it new abilities and challenges. Sarah flexed her hands, watching as retracted claws extended from her fingertips. "We need to find shelter soon," she said, her voice carrying a slight growl. "Somewhere we can set up a lab and continue our research." Yuki nodded, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim Arctic light. "I've been thinking about that. There's an old Cold War-era research bunker about 50 miles north of here. If it's still intact, it might have the equipment we need." Alexei, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly tensed. "We're not alone," he whispered, dropping into a crouch. The others immediately followed suit. Their newly honed instincts kicked in. In the distance, barely visible against the snow, several figures moved with inhuman speed and grace. "More infected?" Yuki asked, her voice low. Sarah shook her head. "No, these are different. More like us." As if in response to her words, one of the figures let out a piercing howl that echoed across the frozen landscape. It was a sound that stirred something primal within them, a call they felt compelled to answer. "We can't avoid them forever," Alexei said, a hint of anticipation in his voice. "Maybe it's time we faced whatever we become." Sarah hesitated, torn between scientific curiosity and caution. But before she could decide, the decision was made for them. The figures were suddenly much closer, moving with impossible speed. In moments, they were surrounded. Sarah counted 6 of them, each bearing signs of the same transformations she and her companions had undergone. Their eyes glowed with bioluminescence, their bodies lithe and powerful beneath their tattered clothing. One of them, a tall woman with silvery hair, stepped forward when she spoke. Her voice was a mixture of growls and clicks that somehow formed coherent words. "You carry the scent of the origin, the place of awakening." Sarah straightened, meeting the woman's gaze. "We were there when it began. We're trying to understand what is happening to us, to find a way to control it." The woman tilted her head, considering. "Control? Why would you want to control evolution? We are becoming what we were always meant to be." Yuki stepped forward. "You seem to have a deeper understanding of these changes. How long have you been like this?" A low chuckle rippled through the group. The silver-haired woman grinned, revealing sharp, predatory teeth. "Time loses meaning when you transcend humanity. We are the first wave, the pioneers of a new era." Alexei's eyes narrowed. "The first wave? You mean there's more of you?" "Scattered, but growing." Another of the group, a muscular man with a scaled scalp, answered. "We felt your presence, your potential. You are like us, yet not incomplete." Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic cold. "What do you mean, incomplete?" The silver-haired woman moved closer, her movements liquid and predatory. "You cling to your old selves, your human limitations. We can help you embrace the change, become what you are meant to be." For a moment, Sarah felt the pull of that offer. Part of her yearned to let go, to fully embrace whatever she was becoming. The scientist in her, the part that still clung to humanity, resisted. "We can't abandon our research," she said firmly. "What's happening to us could be the key to saving humanity, not replacing it." The woman's expression hardened. Save humanity? Why save what is destined to fall? The old world is dying. We are the future. Tension crackled in the air. Sarah could sense her companions, conflicted emotions mirroring her own. The primal part of them was drawn to these evolved beings, but their human consciousness fought against it. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the standoff. The distant whir of a helicopter blades. Everyone tensed, recognizing the threat. The silver-haired woman snarled. "The old world comes, bringing death. You must choose now. Join us, embrace your true nature, or cling to your doomed humanity." Sarah exchanged glances with Yuki and Alexei. In that moment, she saw the same resolve in their eyes that she felt. They had come too far, learned too much to abandon their purpose now. "We choose our own path," Sarah declared, her voice carrying a newfound strength. "Neither fully human nor whatever you become. We'll find our own way." The woman's eyes flashed with anger and something like regret. "Then you choose extinction," she growled. As the helicopters drew closer, chaos erupted. The evolved being melted into the landscape with incredible speed, leaving Sarah, Yuki, and Alexei alone on the ridge. "Run!" Sarah shouted. And they took off, their enhanced bodies carrying them swiftly across the snow. As they fled, Sarah's mind raced. They were caught between two worlds now, hunted by humans who feared them and rejected by those who had fully embraced the change. Their path forward was more uncertain than ever. But one thing was clear. The answers they sought lay not in choosing sides, but in forging their own destiny. The bunker Yuki had mentioned now seemed like their only hope. With renewed determination, they pushed on into the gathering storm, the sound of helicopters fading behind them as they vanished into the Alaskan wilderness. Chapter 7. The Bunker. The old Cold War bunker loomed before them, a concrete monolith half buried in snow and ice. After days of grueling travel, dodging both human patrols and packs of the fully transformed, Sarah, Yuki, and Alexei had finally reached their destination. "Let's hope this place is as abandoned as it looks," Alexei muttered, his enhanced senses scanning for any signs of life or danger. Sarah approached the heavy steel door, her claws extending instinctively. With strength that still surprised her, she pried the frozen door open, metal groaning in protest. The interior was dark and musty, the air thick with decades of disuse. As they entered, their bioluminescent eyes adjusted quickly, revealing a space frozen in time. Old computer terminals, their screens dark and cracked, lined the walls. Dust-covered filing cabinets stood like silent sentinels. "This is perfect," Yuki breathed, already moving towards what appeared to be a laboratory area. "If we can get some of this equipment working, we might actually have a chance at understanding what's happening to us." As they explored further, they discovered that the bunker was more extensive than they'd initially thought. Living quarters, storage areas, and even a small medical bay branched off from the main room. "We should be safe here, at least for a while," Sarah said, her voice echoing silently in the cavernous space. "Let's get to work." Over the next few days, they fell into a rhythm. Yuki focused on repairing and upgrading the old equipment, her enhanced dexterity making the delicate work easier. Alexei took charge of security, rigging up an early warning system using parts salvaged from their journey. Sarah divided her time between analyzing their blood samples and poring over the old research files they'd found in the bunker. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that Sarah made a breakthrough. "I think I found something," she called out, her excitement palpable. Yuki and Alexei hurried over, crowding around the flickering computer screen. "Look at this." Sarah pointed to a series of complex genetic sequences. The virus isn't just activating dormant genes, it's creating entirely new ones. It's as if it's using our DNA as a blueprint to build something more. Alexei frowned, his elongated pupils contracting as he studied the data. "More what, exactly?" "I'm not sure," Sarah admitted. "But whatever it is, it's changing us on a fundamental level. We're not just evolving. We're being redesigned." Yuki's eyes widened as she processed the implications. But to what end? And why are we different from the others we've encountered? Before Sarah could respond, a shrill alarm cut through the air. Alexei was on his feet in an instant, moving with preternatural speed to the security station he'd set up. "We've got company," he growled, bringing up a grainy feed from cameras he'd positioned outside. "Multiple contacts approaching from the north." Sarah and Yuki joined him, peering at the screen. Through the swirling snow, they could make out several figures moving with the fluid grace they'd come to associate with the fully transformed. "It's them," Sarah whispered. "They found us." As they watched more figures emerge from the storm, but these moved differently, jerkier, more aggressive. "Infected. And they're not alone," Alexei added grimly. The two groups clashed in a frenzy of claws and teeth, their inhuman shrieks carrying even through the bunker's thick walls. But amid the chaos, a new sound emerged. The rhythmic thump of helicopter blades. "Three-way battle," Yuki said, her voice tight. "The military's joined the party." Sarah's mind raced, weighing their options. They couldn't stay here. It was only a matter of time before one side or another breached the bunker, but leaving meant abandoning their research, possibly their only chance at finding a solution. As if reading her thoughts, Alexei spoke up. "We need to go now, but not empty-handed." With practiced efficiency, they began gathering their most crucial research materials and equipment, Sarah hesitated over the old files she'd been studying, then made a split-second decision to take them too. Something told her they might hold more answers than she realized. Just as they finished packing, a massive explosion rocked the bunker. Dust and debris rained down as a crack spiderwebbed across the ceiling. They breached the outer defenses, Alexei shouted over the din. We're out of time. They raced to the emergency exit, a narrow tunnel leading away from the main bunker. As they ran, Sarah could hear the sounds of combat growing closer, gunfire mixed with animalistic roars and the screech of tearing metal. They emerged into the howling Arctic night, the storm providing cover as they fled into the wilderness. Behind them, the bunker erupted in a fireball, decades of secret consumed in an instant. As they put distance between themselves and the battle, Sarah felt a mix of emotions churning within her. They'd lost their sanctuary, but the research they'd managed to save might be the key to understanding their transformation, and possibly the fate of humanity itself. Where do we go now? Yuki asked, her voice barely audible over the wind. Sarah looked at her companions, seeing her own determination reflected in their glowing eyes. We find answers, she said firmly, and then we decide the future. Not just for us, but for everyone. As they pressed on into the storm, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were moving towards something monumental. Whether it was salvation or damnation remained to be seen. But one thing was certain, there was no going back to what they once were. The next phase of their journey, and perhaps of human evolution itself, had begun. Chapter 8. Convergence. Days blended into weeks as Sarah, Yuki, and Alexei trekked through the unforgiving Alaskan wilderness. Their enhanced bodies allowed them to cover vast distances, but the constant threat of discovery kept them on edge. They moved mostly at night, their bioluminescent eyes piercing the darkness, always alert for signs of pursuit. One evening, as they set up camp in the shelter of a rocky outcropping, Sarah noticed something odd about her hand. The scales that had begun to form weeks ago were spreading, creating intricate patterns across her skin. It's accelerating, she murmured, studying the changes. Yuki looked up from the portable lab equipment she was setting up. The transformation? I've noticed it too. Our cellular structure is becoming more fluid, for lack of a better term. Alexei, who had been keeping watch, joined the conversation. It's not just physical. I can sense things, intentions, emotions. It's like we're developing a new kind of awareness. Sarah nodded, having experienced similar sensations. We need to understand what's happening to us, and fast. The military, the infected, the evolved, they're all converging. I can feel it. As if on cue, a distant howl echoed across the landscape. It was answered by another, closer this time. They're hunting us, Alexei growled, his pupils contracting to slits. Sarah made a quick decision. Pack up, we need to move. As they hastily gathered their equipment, a new sound cut through the night. The rhythmic thump of helicopter blades. Damn it, Yuki hissed. How do they find us? There was no time to speculate. They took off into the night, their enhanced speed and agility allowing them to navigate the treacherous terrain with ease. But their pursuers were relentless. As they crested a hill, Sarah suddenly stumbled, a searing pain lancing through her head. Visions flashed before her eyes. An underground laboratory, rows of stasis pods, and a familiar face that made her blood run cold. Sarah! Yuki's voice snapped her back to reality. What's wrong? Sarah shook her head, trying to clear the lingering images. I saw something. A place. In Dr. Marcus Emerson. Alexei's eyes widened in recognition. The lead research from the original station? We thought he was dead. He's alive, Sarah said grimly, and I think I know where he is. Before she could elaborate, a spotlight cut through the darkness, illuminating them in harsh white light. The helicopter had found them. Run! Alexei shouted, but it was too late. Nets launched from the helicopter, weighted and electrified. Sarah felt a jolt of pain as one enveloped her, sending her crashing to the ground. Through blurred vision, she saw Yuki and Alexei similarly entangled. As armed figures rappelled down from the helicopter, Sarah struggled against the net. To her surprise, the scales on her skin began to shift and harden, forming a kind of natural armor. With a surge of strength, she tore through the electrified mesh. Nearby, Alexei had managed to slice through his net with extended claws. He moved with blinding speed, disarming 2 soldiers before they could react. Yuki, her transformation taking a different path, seemed to phase through her restraints, her body momentarily becoming translucent. The soldiers, clearly unprepared for the extent of their mutations, fell back in disarray. But more were coming, and in the distance, Sarah could hear the howls of the evolved growing closer. "We can't fight them all," she shouted over the chaos. "We need to split up." It went against every instinct, but they knew it was their only chance. With quick, fierce embraces, they separated, each heading in a different direction. As Sarah ran, pushing her mutated body to the limits, her mind raced. The vision she'd had, the glimpses of Dr. Emerson, it had to be connected to their transformation. She had a feeling that finding him might be the key to understanding what was happening to them and possibly to stopping it. But first, she had to survive. The sounds of pursuit faded as she put distance between herself and the landing site. As she ran, she felt her body continuing to change, adapting to the stress and danger. Her senses sharpened even further, and she could swear she felt the very pulse of the earth beneath her feet. Sarah didn't know where this transformation would lead, or if she'd ever see Yuki and Alexei again, but she clung to one certainty. The answer she sought lay with Dr. Emerson. Somehow, she would find that underground lab, and when she did, she'd finally uncover the truth behind their evolution. As the aurora borealis danced overhead, Sarah pressed on into the unknown, her glowing eyes fixed on the horizon. The hunt was on, but this time, she was the hunter. Chapter 9. Convergence Continued. Sarah crouched at the edge of snow-covered ridge, her transformed body nearly invisible against the stark landscape. Weeks had passed since she'd been separated from Yuki and Alexei, and in that time, her mutations had progressed rapidly. Her skin was now almost entirely covered in iridescent scales that shifted color to match her surroundings, and her senses had sharpened to an almost painful degree. Below her, nestled in a narrow valley, sat a nondescript research facility, the place she'd seen in her vision. Getting here hadn't been easy. She had to evade military patrols, packs of the evolved, and roving bands of the infected. But the pull of this place, and the answers it might hold, had been irresistible. As she studied the facility's defenses, a familiar scent caught her attention. Sarah's head snapped up, her pupils dilated as she scanned the area. There, approaching from the east, were 2 figures moving with fluid grace she recognized all too well. Yuki, Alexei. She breathed a mix of relief and apprehension washing over her. They converged on her position, and Sarah was struck by how much they had changed. Yuki's skin has taken on a translucent quality, with faint bioluminescent patterns pulsing beneath the surface. Alexei had become more muscular, with retractable claws and what looked like armor plates along his spine. No words were needed as they reunited. Their evolved senses allowed them to communicate through a mix of subtle gestures, pheromones, and what could only be described as a type of telepathy. "You felt it too," Sarah said, not really a question. Alexei nodded. "The pull. It's getting stronger. Something big is happening here," Yuki added, her eyes fixed on the facility. "I can sense fluctuations, energy patterns I've never encountered before." Sarah filled them in on her vision of Dr. Emerson in the underground lab. As she spoke, she could feel their shared resolve solidifying whatever was happening in that facility. It was tied to their transformation, and possibly the fate of humanity itself. "We need a plan," Alexei said, his enhanced vision picking out details of the facility's security measures. Sarah nodded. "I've been watching their patterns. There's a blind spot in the sensor grid every 37 minutes. If we time it right, we can..." She broke off suddenly, her head tilting as she caught a new sound in the wind. Yuki and Alexei tensed, having heard it too. "Helicopters," Yuki whispered. "At least 3, coming in fast." "And something else," Alexei growled, his nostrils flaring. "That scent." Sarah felt it too, a primal, almost overwhelming presence approaching rapidly from the north. The evolved, a whole pack of them. They exchanged grim looks, realizing the implications. Every faction in this biological arms race was converging on this one point. Whatever secrets the facility held, they weren't the only ones after them. "We're out of time," Sarah said, her voice taking on a commanding tone that surprised even her. "We go now, or we might not ever get another chance." Without further discussion, they moved as one. their mutated bodies allowing them to cover the distance to the facility with incredible speed. As they approached the perimeter, alarms began to blare. Their presence had been detected, blind spot or not. Gunfire erupted from the guard towers, but they were ready. Yuki's body seemed to shimmer, the bullets passing harmlessly through her translucent form. Alexi's armored plates deflected shots as he barreled through a security checkpoint. Sarah used her chameleon-like camouflage to slip past defenses, taking out key systems with her precisely aimed strikes. They fought their way inside as chaos erupted around the facility. Military helicopters engaged with airborne evolved beings in a deadly aerial dance. On the ground, waves of infected clashed with security forces, their inhuman shrieks filling the air. Inside, the three made their way deeper into the complex, following Sarah's instincts and the pull that they felt. They encountered pockets of resistance, guards and scientists alike, but their enhanced abilities made short work of any opposition. Finally, they reached a heavily reinforced door marked Restricted Area, Project Prometheus. "This is it," Sarah said, her heart racing with anticipation. Alexei stepped forward, his claws extending. With a series of swift, powerful strikes, he tore through the reinforced metal like it was paper. As the door fell away, they stepped into a vast underground chamber filled with rows of glowing stasis pods. And there, standing calmly in the center of it all, was Dr. Marcus Emerson. "Welcome," he said, a serene smile on his face. "I've been expecting you." Sarah, Yuki, and Alexei spread out, their enhanced senses on high alert for any threat. But Emerson made no hostile moves. Instead, he gestured to the pods around them. "Beautiful, aren't they? The next stage of human evolution, carefully cultivated and controlled. Unlike your spontaneous adaptations." "What have you done, Marcus?" Sarah demanded, her voice a low growl. Emerson's smile widened. "My dear Sarah, I've done what any good scientist would do. I've ensured the survival of our species. The virus you encountered? It was just the beginning. Here, we refined it, perfected it." As he spoke, the pods began to open with a hydraulic hiss. From each one emerged a figure, human in basic shape, but clearly altered in significant ways. "You see," Emerson continued, "the random mutations out there are just that, random, chaotic. Here, we're guiding evolution, creating the perfect adaptations for a changing world." Yuki stepped forward, her translucent skin pulsing with agitation. "You're playing God." "I'm saving humanity," Emerson countered. "And now that you're here, we can complete the process. Your unique mutations, combined with our research, imagine the possibilities." Outside, the sound of the battles grew louder. The facility shook with distant explosions. "You don't have much time to decide," Emerson said, his tone hardening. "Join us. Help us perfect the next stage of human evolution. Or..." He left the threat unspoken, but the meaning was clear. Around them, the engineered evolved began to move, their intent unmistakable. Sarah, Yuki, and Alexei exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. In that moment, they faced not just a physical threat, but an existential choice, one that could determine the future of their species. As alarms blared and the facility trembled around them, Sarah stepped forward, her decision made. The true battle for humanity's future was about to begin. Chapter 10. Crucible. The underground chamber trembled with another distant explosion as Sarah faced Dr. Emerson, her transformed body coiled with tension. Beside her, Yuki and Alexei stood ready, their mutations pulsing with barely contained energy. "You're insane, Marcus," Sarah growled, her voice carrying otherworldly resonance. "You can't control evolution. You're going to destroy everything." Emerson's calm demeanor slipped from a moment, revealing a flash of fanatical zeal. "Destroy? I'm saving us. The world is changing, Sarah. Climate collapse, resource wars, pandemics. Humanity as we know it is doomed. This," he gestured to the engineered evolved surrounding them, "is our only hope for survival." As if to punctuate his words, the facility shook violently, alarms blaring with increased urgency. Yuki's translucent form shimmered with agitation. "Your controlled subjects won't save anyone. They're as much a threat as the infected outside. You don't understand, Emerson insisted, desperation creeping into his voice. We're on the cusp of a breakthrough. With your unique mutations, we can perfect the process. Create beings adapted to any environment, any challenge. Alexei snarled, his armor plates shifting. At what cost? Our humanity? Before Emerson could respond, the reinforced doors to the chamber burst inward. A wave of infected poured through, their mutated forms a horrifying contrast to the sleek, engineered evolved. Close behind them came another group, the fully transformed beings they'd encountered in the wilderness. Chaos erupted as the various factions clashed. Emerson's engineered evolved moved precision, but they were outnumbered. The infected attacked with mindless ferocity, while the wilderness evolved fought with their cunning and raw power. Sarah, Yuki, and Alexei found themselves at the center of the storm. Their unique mutations allowed them to hold their own, but the sheer number of combatants was overwhelming. As they fought, Sarah noticed something strange. The longer the battle raged, the more her body seemed to adapt. She could feel her DNA shifting, incorporating traits from around her. A glance at her companions confirmed they were experiencing the same phenomenon. Across the chamber, she saw Emerson frantically working at a control panel. With horror, she realized he was initiating some kind of fail-safe protocol. He's going to release everything, she shouted to her companions. All of his experiments, all at once. They fought their way towards Emerson, but it was too late. Pods throughout the chamber began to open, releasing a dizzying array of mutated beings. Some were clearly failed experience, writhing in agony. Others were terrifying effective killing machines. As the new combatants joined the fray, Sarah, Yuki, and Alexei found themselves backed into a corner. The battle had become a crucible of evolution, with only the most adaptable surviving the moment to moment. Suddenly, Sarah felt a surge of energy unlike anything she'd experienced before. Her body began to change rapidly, incorporating the most effective traits from every being in the chamber. She could sense Yuki and Alexei undergoing similar transformations. In that moment of metamorphosis, a strange clarity came over Sarah. She could see the strands of DNA swirling around them, the potential futures branching out in infinite directions, and she understood what needed to be done. With a thought, she reached out to Yuki and Alexei, their minds linking in a way that transcended their physical forms. Together, they began to exert control over the chaotic evolution happening around them. Infected began to regain their sanity. The wilderness evolved felt the pull towards a more balanced form. Even Emerson's engineered subjects started to change, shedding their artificial constraints. Emerson watched in awe and terror as his life's work unraveled before him. "What are you doing?" he screamed over the din. Sarah turned to him, her form now a stunning synthesis of human and evolved traits. "What you couldn't, Marcus. We're guiding evolution, but not controlling it. We're finding balance." As the transformation spread throughout the chamber, the fighting gradually ceased. The various factions, once so distinct, began to merge into a new, unified form of life. The facility gave one final, massive shudder. Alexei, his senses now vastly enhanced, called out, "The whole place is coming down. We need to get out of here." Sarah nodded, reaching out with her newfound abilities to coordinate their escape. As one, the newly evolved beings moved towards the exit, leaving behind the ruins of Emerson's grand experiment. They emerged into the Arctic night to find the world in chaos. The military forces had been overwhelmed, their weapons useless against the tide of evolution. But now, guided by Sarah, Yuki, and Alexei, that tide was turning into something new. Something with the potential to bridge the gap between what humanity had been and what it needed to become. As they stood on the precipice of a new era, Sarah looked at her companions. They were no longer just scientists or even merely evolved beings. They had become something more, guardians of a new form of life, shepherds of humanity's next great leap. "What now?" Yuki asked, her voice resonating with newfound power and responsibility. Sarah gazed out at the aurora-lit horizon, feeling the pulse of the changed world around them. "Now," she said, "we guide. We teach. We help humanity evolve not just to survive, but to thrive in the world we've inherited." As if in response to her words, the first rays of dawn broke over the Arctic landscape. It was, Sarah realized, the first sunrise of a new age. An age of uncertainty, yes, but also one of incredible potential. Together, they stepped forward into the light, ready to face whatever challenges this brave new world might bring. Chapter 1. The Beginning of the End. I never thought I'd be telling a story like this. My name is Jack Thompson, and I'm 24 years old. Just a few months ago, I was a normal graduate student at Cornell University, buried in books and research. My biggest worry being my thesis deadline. Now, I'm fighting for survival in a world gone mad. It all started on a crisp autumn day in Ithaca. The leaves were just beginning to turn, painting the campus in hues of red and gold. I was in the library, surrounded by stacks of neurobiological textbooks when I first heard the screams. At first, I thought it was just some students horsing around. But then came the sound of breaking glass and more screams. These weren't playful shouts, but genuine cries of terror. I stood up, my heart pounding, and peered over the rows of bookshelves. What I saw will haunt me forever. Professor Reeves from the English department was attacking a student, but not in any way I'd ever seen before. His movements were jerky, yet purposeful, his eyes blazing with an inhuman intelligence. The student was on the ground, trying to crawl away, leaving a trail of blood on the polished floor. I should have run. I should have hidden. Instead, I shouted, "Hey, stop!" Professor Reeves turned to me, and in that moment, I knew he wasn't Professor Reeves anymore. His skin was ashen, his eyes clouded yet somehow sharp. He tilted his head, studying me with a predatory gaze that sent chills down my spine. Then he smiled. It wasn't a human smile. It was calculating, cold, hungry. He took a step forward to me, then another. I backed away, my mind reeling. This couldn't be happening. Zombies weren't real. There was stuff of bad horror movies, not something you encountered in an Ivy League library. But as I watched Professor Reeves advance, I saw something that terrified me even more than his appearance. He was thinking, planning. I could almost see the gears turning behind those dead eyes. He glanced at the heavy textbook in my hands, then at a fire extinguisher on the wall. In that split second, I realized he was analyzing the situation, looking for weapons, strategizing. I didn't want to see what he'd do next. I turned and ran, my footsteps echoing through the suddenly silent library. Behind me, I heard Professor Reeves let out a low, guttural sound. Not a mindless groan, but almost like a call. As I burst out of the library doors into the fading afternoon light, my phone buzzed. It was an emergency alert from the university. Shelter in place. Multiple reports of violent attacks on campus. This is not a drill. I looked up and saw chaos unfolding across the quad. Students were running in all directions. Campus security was overwhelmed. And there, moving with a terrifying purpose, were more people like Professor Reeves. They weren't shambling or mindless. They were coordinating, cutting off escape routes, herding panicking students like cattle. As I stood there, frozen in shock, one thought kept repeating in my mind. These weren't zombies. There was something much, much worse. They were intelligent, they were organized, and they were evil. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. The world as I knew it was over, and the fight for survival was about to begin. Chapter 2. The Fall of Ithaca. The next few hours were a blur of panic and adrenaline. As night fell over Ithaca, the city descended into chaos. I sprinted across campus, dodging groups of the intelligent undead and trying to process what was happening around me. My dorm was out of the question. I could see from a distance that it had already been overrun. Instead, I found myself running towards Bradfield Hall, where I'd spent countless hours in the atmospheric science labs. It was one of the tallest buildings on campus, offering a good vantage point and, hopefully, safety. As I raced up the stairs, taking them two at a time, I nearly collided with Sarah Chen, a biology grad student I knew from the cafeteria. "Jake!" she gasped, her eyes wide with fear. "What the hell is going on?" "I don't know," I panted, ushering her up the stairs. "But those things out there, they're not normal zombies, they're thinking." We barricaded ourselves in the top floor lab, and that's when we got our first real look at the scale of the disaster. The city was burning. Sirens wailing in the distance, punctuated by screams and the occasional burst of gunfire. But what chilled me to the bone was the methodical movement of the zombies through the streets. They were organizing search parties, setting up ambushes at major intersections. I watched in horror as one group used a car to smash the doors of the police station. This wasn't mindless violence. It was a tactical assault. "My God," Sarah whispered, her face pale in the eerie glow of the fires. "It's like they're waging war." As the night wore on, more survivors found their way to our makeshift fortress. Mike, a burly campus security guard with military experience, arrived with a group of terrified freshmen. Dr. Chen from the neuroscience department stumbled in just before dawn, clutching a laptop to his chest like it was a lifeline. "I think I know what's happening," Dr. Chen said, his voice hoarse, "but you're not going to like it." He booted up his laptop, showing us a confidential email thread. Apparently, a local pharmaceutical company had been conducting trials on a new cognitive enhancement drug. The goal was to cure Alzheimer's, but something had gone terribly wrong. The drug doesn't just repair neural pathways, Dr. Chen explained. It hyperactivates them, even post-mortem. These creatures retain their intelligence, their memories, without any moral constraints. They're pure id, driven by primal urges, but with human-level problem-solving abilities. The implications were staggering. We weren't just facing zombies. We were up against the worst part of human nature, amplified and unleashed. As the sun rose in a changed world, we gathered around a small radio, listening to emergency broadcasts. The outbreak wasn't confined to Ithaca. Reports were coming in from across upstate New York, each more dire than the last. "We need a plan," Mike said, his jaw set with determination. "We can't stay here forever." But as I looked out over the smoke-filled skyline of what used to be my home, I realized the truth. Ithaca had fallen, and if these intelligent zombies kept spreading, it was only a matter of time before the rest of the world followed. "First, we survive," I said, surprising myself with the steel in my voice. "Then we figure out how to fight back." Little did I know, our small group of survivors would soon be thrust into the heart of humanity's desperate struggle against an enemy that was almost all too familiar and all too clever. As we began to fortify our position, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere out there, the zombies were doing the exact same thing. The battle for upstate New York, and perhaps the world, had only just begun. Chapter 3. Adapting to the new reality. The days that followed our crash course in survival. Our little group in Bradfield Hall quickly realized that our greatest asset against these intelligent zombies was our ability to adapt and learn. Dr. Chen's expertise proved invaluable. He hypothesized that the zombies, despite their retained intelligence, were driven by a need to spread their condition. "They're like a virus of the mind," he explained. "They want to infect, not just kill." This information changed our entire strategy. We couldn't just hide. We needed to understand our enemy to have any hopes of surviving. Sarah, with her background in biology, worked tirelessly with Dr. Chen to analyze the limited data we had. They theorized that the zombies' intelligence might be linked to their need to feed. The more they consumed, the sharper they became. Mike took charge of our defenses. He taught us basic combat techniques and how to use the meager weapons we'd scavenged. Mostly makeshift clubs and a few fire axes. "Aim for the head," he reminded us during our daily drills. "It's still the surest way to stop them." As for me, I found myself becoming the group's unofficial leader. My days were spent organizing supply runs, mediating disputes, and trying to boost morale. It was a role I never asked for, but one I grew into out of necessity. About a week into our new life, we had our first major test. A group of zombies, led by what appeared to be a former Cornell professor, attempted to infiltrate our building. They didn't just mindlessly attack. They tried to trick us. The zombies sent one of their own, a young woman who looked relatively unharmed, to our doors pleading for help. It was only Mike's trained eye that noticed her slightly off gait and the faint cloudiness in her eyes. We watched in horrified fascination as the ploy unfolded. When we didn't take the bait, the zombies switched tactics. They started to fire on the lower floors, trying to smoke us out. "They're learning," Sarah whispered, her voice a mix of fear and scientific curiosity. They're adapting to our defenses. It was a grueling night. We fought the fire and the zombies, using everything we'd learned. In the end, we managed to repel them, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. We lost 2 of our group, and our supplies were dangerously low. The next morning, as we surveyed the damage, I made a difficult decision. We can't stay here, I announced to the group. We're too exposed, and they know where we are now. There were murmurs of agreement and fear. Bradfield Hall had been our safe haven, but it was quickly becoming a trap. Where will we go? One of the freshmen asked, her voice quavering. I took a deep breath. We head north, into the Adirondacks. There's less population density there, which hopefully means fewer zombies, and the train will give us an advantage. These things might be smart, but they're still dead. They'll have trouble in the wilderness. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all we had. As we packed what little we could carry, I caught a glimpse of myself in a broken mirror. I hardly recognized the person staring back at me, gaunt, grimy, with eyes that had seen too much in too short a time. But there was something else there too, a determination I'd never known I possessed. We were survivors, adapting as quickly as the zombies were, and I was beginning to realize that in the new world, that might be the only thing that could save us. As we prepared to leave the relative safety of Bradfield Hall for the unknown dangers beyond, I couldn't shake the feeling that our journey was just beginning. The zombies had taken Ithaca, but the war for survival was far from over. Little did I know, our trek into the Adirondacks would lead us to discoveries that would change everything we thought we knew about this new, terrifying world. Chapter 4. The Journey North. The morning we left Bradfield Hall was somber. Ithaca, or what was left of it, stretched out before us. A landscape of destruction and eerie silence. We moved quietly through the streets, our small group of survivors huddled close, eyes darting at every shadow and sound. Our plan was simple. Head north toward the Adirondacks, scavenge what we could along the way, and avoid confrontation with the intelligent undead at all costs. Easier said than done. The first few days were nerve-wracking. We stuck to back roads and forests, avoiding main highways where the zombies seemed to congregate. It was slow going, but it kept us alive. On our 3rd day out, we had our first major encounter since leaving Ithaca. We were passing through a small town. I think it was Morovia, when we heard it. Music, faint but unmistakable. It's a trap, Mike said immediately, his military instincts kicking in. But Dr. Chen wasn't so sure. Could be survivors, he argued, but we can't just ignore it. I made the call to investigate, but cautiously. Sarah, Mike, and I crept towards the source of the music while the others hung back, ready to run if things went south. What we found chilled me to the bone. In the town square, a group of zombies had set up an elaborate scene. They'd propped up corpses to look like they were having a picnic, complete with a battery-powered radio playing cheerful oldies. It was a macabre tableau designed to lure in unsuspecting victims. But the truly terrifying part was watching the zombies hide and wait. They were patient, coordinated. I saw one of them, a former police officer judging by the tattered uniform, using hand signals to direct the others. We retreated silently, thankful we'd spotted the trap before it was sprung. But the encounter left us shaken. The zombies weren't just intelligent. They were capable of complex, premeditated strategies. As we continued north, we started noticing more signs of the zombies' evolving behavior. They were setting up checkpoints on major roads, creating supply caches, even leaving messages for each other scrawled on walls and road signs. They're building a society, Sarah observed one evening as we huddled around a small campfire. A twisted, evil society, but a society nonetheless. It was a sobering thought. We weren't just fighting for survival. We were fighting for the very concept of humanity. Our journey wasn't all grim discoveries, though. We found other survivors. A family of farmers who shared their food. A group of hikers who knew the safest routes to the mountains. Each encounter renewed our hope and reminded us of what we were fighting for. About 2 weeks into our trek, as we were navigating the foothills of the Adirondacks, we stumbled upon something unexpected. A military blockade. For a moment, my heart soared. Had we found salvation? But as we got closer, we realized the soldiers manning the blockade weren't alive. They were zombies. The zombies had taken over a military outpost, and they were using the equipment and weapons with chilling efficiency. We were forced to detour deep into the mountains, away from any semblance of civilization. The going was tough, but it felt safer than facing any weaponized zombies. It was during this detour that we made a discovery that would change everything. High up in the mountains, we found an old research station. It was abandoned, but intact, and inside, we found a treasure trove of scientific equipment and a satellite phone. As Dr. Chen and Sarah pored over the equipment, their eyes lighted up with possibilities. I realized we had found more than just a safe haven. We had found a place where we could start fighting back. That night, as we settled into the relative comfort of the research station, I looked out over the darkened mountains. Somewhere out there, the intelligent zombies were plotting, planning, evolving. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had made it this far. We had adapted and survived. And now, with this newfound resource, maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to turn the tide. As I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that our real battle was just beginning. The journey north had been the first step in a war that would determine the fate of humanity itself. Chapter 5: The Mountain Stronghold. The research station quickly became our new home in the center of the resistance. Perched high in the Adirondacks, it offered a natural protection and a stunning view of the valley below. More importantly, it gave us a chance to catch our breath and start thinking beyond mere survival. Dr. Chen and Sarah wasted no time in setting up a makeshift lab. The station's equipment, while outdated, was still functional. They began analyzing blood samples from our group, hoping to understand why we were immune to the zombie plague. Meanwhile, Mike and I focused on fortifying our position. We set up early warning systems using the station's old weather monitoring equipment, rigged to alert us when any movement on the access roads. We also established a series of caches and escape routes in case we needed to abandon the station quickly. The satellite phone proved to be our lifeline to the outside world. We made contact with other survivor groups and military outposts across the country. The news was grim. The intelligent zombies had spread far beyond New York, and traditional containment methods were failing. But we also heard whispers of hope. There were rumors of a resistance forming, scientists working on a cure. Our little mountain stronghold was becoming a node in a network of survivors fighting to reclaim our world. About a month into our stay at the station, we had our first major breakthrough. Sarah burst into the common room one evening, her eyes wide with excitement. "We found something," she announced breathlessly. "The zombie virus. It's not just affecting the brain. It's altering the entire nervous system, creating new neural pathways." Dr. Chen nodded emphatically. "It's like the virus is building a new operating system for the human body. That's why they retain their intelligence and memories, but lose their humanity." It was fascinating, but I couldn't see how it helped us. "Can we use this information somehow?" I asked. Sarah's eyes gleamed. "Maybe, if we can understand how the virus rewires the nervous system, we might be able to disrupt it. We could potentially create a weapon that targets their new neural pathways." It was the first real hope we'd had in months. We threw ourselves into the research, everyone contributing in whatever way they could. Even those of us without scientific backgrounds helped by maintaining the station, gathering supplies, and keeping watch. Our work was interrupted one stormy night by an unexpected arrival. A group of bedraggled survivors stumbled upon our station, led by a former Army Ranger named Alicia. They brought with them new information and resources, but also a warning. "The zombies are organizing on a larger scale," Alicia told us grimly. "They're not just forming packs anymore. They're creating hierarchies, with the most intelligent ones taking leadership roles." This news sent a chill through our group. The ideas of the zombies forming a coherent society was terrifying, but it also gave us a potential target. If we could disrupt their leadership, we might be able to throw their entire organization into chaos. As we integrated Alicia's group into our own, I found myself spending more time with her, learning about military tactics and leadership. She became a valuable ally and friend, her experience complementing my own growing skills as a leader. Our routine at the station was interrupted a few weeks later when our early warning system detected a large group approaching. We prepared for a fight, but what we saw through our binoculars left us stunned. It was a mixed group of humans and zombies, moving together without hostility. At their head was a figure that made my blood run cold. Professor Reeves, the first intelligent zombie I'd encountered back in Ithaca. As they drew closer, we saw that Professor Reeves was carrying a white flag. The zombies wanted a parley. I looked around at my companions, seeing my own confusion and fear reflected in their eyes. This was unprecedented. What could the zombies possibly want? And more importantly, could we trust them? As a strange delegation approached our stronghold, I realized we were standing on the precipice of a new chapter in this conflict. Whatever happened next would shape the future of our struggle, and perhaps the future of humanity itself. With a deep breath, I made the decision to hear them out. As I prepared to face Professor Reeves again, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. For better or worse, the real battle for upstate New York and the world was about to begin. Chapter 6. The Parley. The tension was palpable as we waited for Professor Reeves and his delegation to reach the station's entrance. I stood at the forefront of our group, flanked by Mike and Alicia, both armed and alert. Sarah and Dr. Chen hung back, ready to provide insights if needed. As the mixed group of zombies and humans drew closer, I could see Professor Reeves more clearly. He looked different from when I saw him in the library, more decayed, but somehow more focused. His eyes, though clouded, burned with an unsettling intelligence. "Jake Thompson," he called out, his voice a raspy approximation of his former professional tone. "I see you've done well for yourself." I suppressed a shudder. "What do you want, Professor?" He smiled, a grotesque parody of warmth. "To talk. To negotiate. We're not the mindless monsters you think we are." "You're killing and infecting people," I retorted. "Sounds pretty monstrous to me." Reeves nodded, as if acknowledging a fair point. "We do what we must to survive and propagate. Not so different from you humans, really. But we're evolving, Jake. We're becoming something new. And we think it's time for a truce." I was stunned. A truce? With the zombies? It seemed absurd. Yet, here they were, offering just that. Reeves continued. "We propose a division of territory. We'll stay out of the mountains if you agree to leave the lowlands to us. No more fighting, no more losses on either side." I glanced at my companions. Mike's jaw was set in a hard line, clearly against the idea. Alicia looked thoughtful, while Sarah and Dr. Chen were whispering furiously to each other. "And the humans with you?" I asked, nodding to the terrified-looking people mixed in with the zombies. "Volunteers," Reeves said smoothly. "They've chosen to join us, to be part of our new society." I didn't believe that for a second, but I kept my face neutral. "We'll need time to discuss your proposal." Reeves nodded. "Of course. We'll camp in the valley below. You have until tomorrow morning to decide." As they retreated, we huddled inside the station, emotions running high. "We can't trust them," Mike insisted. "It's obviously a trap." "But what if it's not?" Sarah countered. "This could be an opportunity to study them, up close, to find a cure." Alicia shook her head. "Too risky. We'd be exposing ourselves to infection." The debate raged on, but I remained silent, turning the situation over in my mind. Finally, I spoke up. "We're going to accept their offer," I said, raising my hands to quiet the immediate protests. "But not because we trust them. We'll use this opportunity to gather intelligence, to understand their organization better, and we'll prepare for the fight that's sure to come." It was a dangerous game, but it was our best chance to get an advantage. We spent the night preparing, setting up hidden cameras and sensors to monitor the zombie camp. The next morning, I met Reeves again. "We accept your proposal," I told him, watching his face carefully. "But we have conditions." As I laid out our terms, restricted zones, regular check-ins, exchanges of information, I could see the calculated look in Reeves' eyes. He was playing the same game we were, looking for weaknesses, seeking advantages. We shook hands to seal the deal, his cold, clammy grip a reminder of the unnaturalness of our allies. As Reeves and his group departed, Alicia came to stand beside me. "You know this won't last," she said quietly. I nodded. "No, it won't. But it buys us time, and right now, that's the most valuable thing we have." Back inside, we gathered around our makeshift command center. "All right," I said, looking at each of my companions in turn. "Now the real work begins. We need to use this time wisely. Sarah, Dr. Chen, double-check into research. Mike, Alicia, start planning for every possible scenario when this truce inevitably breaks." As everyone dispersed to their tasks, I couldn't shake the feeling of foreboding. We were entering a new phase of this conflict, one that would require all of our intelligence, creativity, and courage. The battle for upstate New York had become a chess match, and we were playing against an enemy that was always one step ahead. But as I looked at the determined faces of my companions, I felt a surge of hope. We had come this far. We had survived, adapted, and grown stronger. Whatever the intelligent zombies were planning, we would be ready. The fate of humanity depended on it. Chapter 7. The Calm Before the Storm. The weeks following our truce with the zombies were surreal. On the surface, a tense peace held, but underneath, both sides were preparing for the inevitable conflict to come. We used our time wisely. Sarah and Dr. Chen made significant progress in their research, working tirelessly to understand the zombie virus and its effects on the nervous system. They were onto something big, a potential weakness in the zombies, neural network that could be exploited. Meanwhile, Mike and Alicia transformed our mountain stronghold into a fortress. They trained everyone in combat techniques, set up intricate defense systems, and strategized for every possible scenario. I split my time between helping with the preparations and monitoring our uneasy truce with the zombies. Our surveillance of the zombie camp in the valley yielded disturbing insights. We observed complex social structures forming, with clear hierarchies and specialized roles. Some zombies seemed to be purely fighters, while others appeared to be problem solvers or builders. It was like watching a twisted mirror of human society evolve and fast forward. About a month into the truce, we had our first major breakthrough. Sarah burst into our command center, her eyes wild with excitement. "We've done it," she announced. "We found a way to disrupt their neural pathways. It's not a cure, but it could essentially reset them, temporarily reverting them to a mindless state." It was the advantage we've been hoping for. We immediately began working on ways to weaponize this discovery, developing a device that could emit the disruptive frequency over a large area. But our progress didn't go unnoticed. We began to see increased zombie activity around the borders of our territory. They were probing our defenses, testing our resolve. Professor Reeve requested more frequent meetings, each time probing for information about our research. Then, about 6 weeks into the truce, everything changed. One of our scavenging parties failed to return. We found them 2 days later, or what was left of them. They had been ambushed well within our territory, a clear violation of our truce. When I confronted Reeves about it, his response chilled me to the bone. "Evolution is a harsh mistress, Jake," he said, his dead eyes gleaming with malice. "The strong survive, the weak perish. It's time for the next stage of our coexistence." I knew then that the brief peace was over. The zombies had used the truth to gather intelligence, just as we had. Now, they were ready to make their move. We retreated to our mountain stronghold and prepared for war. Our early warning systems were going haywire, detecting massive zombie movements throughout the region. They were massing for an attack, and we were right in the crosshairs. The night before the expected assault, I gathered everyone in the main hall of our base. Faces that had become dear to me over the past months looked back, a mix of fear and determination in their eyes. "Tomorrow, we face our greatest challenge," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil in my gut. "The zombies are coming, and they're coming in force. But we have something they don't. Our humanity. Our ability to hope, to love, to fight for something greater than ourselves." I paused, looking at each person in turn. We've prepared for this. We have weapons they can't anticipate. We have the high ground. And most importantly, we have each other. Tomorrow, we don't just fight for our lives. We fight for the future of humanity. A chorus of determined voices answered me. We spent the rest of the night making final preparations, checking weapons, and saying what might be final goodbyes. As dawn broke, I stood on the roof of our base, watching the mist rise from the valleys below. Somewhere out there, an army of intelligent undead was approaching. The fate of upstate New York, perhaps the world, would be decided in the coming battle. I thought of how far we'd come since the day in the Cornell Library when my world turned upside down. We had faced unimaginable horrors, lost friends, and been pushed to our limits. We had also discovered strength we never knew we had, forged unbreakable bonds, and kindled a flame of hope in the darkness. As the first zombies appeared on the horizon, a vast horde shambled toward us with terrible purpose. I felt a strange calm settle over me. This was it. The moment everything had been leading to. I turned to Mike and Alicia, who stood ready beside me. "Let's show them what humanity can do," I said, my voice firm with resolve. The battle for our future was about to begin. Chapter 8. The Battle for Humanity. The attack came with the rising sun. The zombie horde surged up the mountain slopes, their numbers far greater than we had anticipated. From our vantage point, it looked like a tide of death washing over the landscape. But we were ready. As the first wave approached our outer defenses, Mike gave the signal. Hidden speakers throughout the surrounding forest blasted the neural disruption frequency we had developed. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Hundreds of zombies stumbled, their coordinated movements dissolving into confused shambling. "It's working!" Sarah shouted over the din, her face a mixture of elation and disbelief. But our victory was short-lived. From the back of the horde, a second wave emerged, zombies wearing crude helmets that seemed to shield them from the disruptive frequency. Leading them was Professor Reeves, his face contorted in a grotesque sneer. "They've adapted," Dr. Chen said, his voice grim, faster than we expected. There was no time to dwell on the setback. The battle was upon us in full force. Our defenses held initially, automated turrets and strategically placed explosives thinning the zombie ranks, but they kept coming, using tactics that showed a chilling level of strategic thinking. I found myself in the thick of the fighting, wielding a modified rifle that fired darts loaded with a concentrated version of our neural disruptor. Every shot dropped a zombie, but for each one that fell, 2 more took its place. Hours blurred together in a haze of desperate combat. We lost people, good people. Each death was a knife to my heart, a reminder of the cost of this war. But we held our ground, our determination fueled by the knowledge we were humanity's last hope. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows of the battlefield, I spotted Professor Reeves directing his forces from a ridge. In that moment, I knew what I had to do. "Cover me!" I shouted to Alicia, who nodded grimly and laid down suppressing fire. I fought my way through the chaos, single-mindedly focused on reaching Reeves. He saw me coming, his dead eyes lighting up with a twisted glee. "Ah, Jake," he called out as I approached. "Come to join us at last?" "This ends now, Reeves," I growled, raising my weapon. What followed was both a battle of body and mind. Reeves was inhumanly strong, but I had rage and desperation on my side. We grappled at the edge of the ridge, each trying to gain the upper hand. "Why fight it, Jake?" Reeves hissed as he struggled. "We are the next step in evolution. Join us and be part of something greater." His words stirred something in me. Not temptation, but a renewed sense of what we were fighting for. "Humanity is already part of something greater," I shot back. "We have hope, love, compassion, things you've lost." With a surge of strength, I managed to jam a neural disruptor dart into Reeves' neck. He howled, more in anger than pain, and stumbled backwards. For a moment, he teetered on the edge of the ridge. Our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of something. Fear, maybe, or a ghost of his former humanity. Then he was gone, tumbling down the steep slope. The effect of the zombie forces was immediate. Without Reeves' direction, their coordinated assaults fell apart. They began to fight among themselves, confused and directionless. Taking advantage of the chaos, we launched our final counterattack. The neural disruptor frequency, combined with our conventional weapons, turned the tide. By midnight, it was over. The remaining zombies had either been neutralized or had fled into the wilderness. As dawn broke on the day after the battle, I stood with my surviving companions, surveying the carnage. We had won, but at a terrible cost. Our mountain stronghold was in ruins, and many of our friends were gone. But as I looked at the faces of the survivors, tired, grieving, but unbowed, I felt a glimmer of hope. We had faced the worst that this new world could throw at us, and we had prevailed. "What now?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse from shouting orders during the battle. I took a deep breath, looking out over the scarred landscapes of what had once been a peaceful mountain range. "Now," I said, "we rebuild. We take what we've learned. We honor those we've lost, and we start reclaiming our world." As the others nodded in agreement, I knew that our journey was far from over. The intelligent zombies are still out there, and there was surely other challenges ahead. But we had proven that humanity's spirit could not be broken. The battle for upstate New York was won. The war for our future was just beginning. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I truly believed we could win. Chapter 9. The Aftermath and New Beginnings. The days following our victory were a blur of exhaustion, grief, and cautious hope. As we buried our fallen comrades and tended the wounded, the full weight of what we had accomplished and what we had lost began to sink in. Our mountain stronghold, once a beacon of hope and resistance, now lay in ruins. The surrounding forest was scarred by battle, the ground littered with the remains of both zombies and humans. The cost had been high, but we had survived. As we began the arduous task of cleaning up and rebuilding, we also focused on consolidating our knowledge. Dr. Chen and Sarah worked tirelessly to document everything we had learned about the zombies and the virus that created them. Their research, combined with our battle experiences, would be invaluable to the fights to come. About a week after the battle, as we were salvaging what we could from our damaged lab, Sarah made an unexpected discovery. "Jake," she called out, her voice trembling with excitement, "you need to see this." I rushed over to see her peering into a microscope. "What is it?" She looked up at me, her eyes shining. I think I might have stumbled onto a cure." The news spread through our camp like wildfire, igniting a spark of hope that could be dimmed by the recent battle. If Sarah was right, we might have a way not just to fight the zombies, but to save them, to bring them back to the humans they once were. But our celebration was short-lived. That evening, our long-range radio crackled to life with an urgent message from a military outpost in Albany. The zombies we had fought were just the vanguard of a much larger force. A massive horde was moving across the state, more organized and deadlier than anything we had faced before. As I shared this news with the others, I could see the weariness in their eyes. We had just survived one battle. Did we have the strength for another? But then Alicia spoke up, her voice firm. "We're not alone in this fight anymore. We have knowledge, we have a potential cure, and we have proof that these things can be beaten. It's time we took the fight to them." Her words galvanized us. Over the next few days, we formulated a plan. We would abandon our mountain stronghold and make our way to Albany, sharing our knowledge and gathering allies along the way. With the military's resources and our expertise, we might have a real chance of turning the tide. The journey would be perilous. We knew the zombies controlled much of the lowlands, and winter was approaching, promising harsh travel conditions. But we also knew that staying put was not an option. The future of humanity was at stake. As we prepared for our departure, I found myself standing at the makeshift memorial we had created for our fallen friends. My hands traced the names etched into the rough wooden plaque, each one a reminder of the cost of our struggle and the importance of our mission. "We won't let your sacrifice be in vain," I whispered to the silent names. On the morning of our departure, I gathered our group, now a hardened band of survivors and warriors. Looking at their faces, I saw determination, fear, hope, and resolve. What lies ahead won't be easy, I began, my voice carrying across the crisp mountain air. We've lost much, and will likely lose much more before this is over. But we carry with us the key to humanity's survival. Each of you have proven your strength, your courage, and your humanity in the face of unimaginable horror. Together, we're going to take back this world. A chorus of affirmations met my words. As we shouldered our packs and weapons, taking one last look at the place we had called home and fortress, I felt a mixture of sadness and anticipation. We were leaving behind the safety of our mountain refuge, venturing into a world overrun by intelligent, evolving zombies. The journey to Albany would test us in ways that we couldn't imagine. We were no longer the scared, desperate survivors who had first fled these mountains. We were stronger now, united in purpose and armed with knowledge that could change the course of this war. As we began our descent into the valley, the rising sun at our backs, I allowed myself a moment of optimism. The battle for upstate New York had been won, but the war for humanity's future was beginning, and this time, we were taking the fight to them. The road ahead was long and fraught with danger, but for the first time since this nightmare began, the future held more than just survival. It held hope. The ungodly day. It was just another monotonous morning for Gary Wilkin, CPA. He sat at his desk staring at columns of numbers on the computer screen, trying to make sense of the client's messy finances. His daily grind gas station coffee had long gone stale. His daily grind gas station coffee had long gone cold and stale. Just another day at the office for an overworked accountant in the city. That's when the screams began. At first, it seemed like a commotion out in the street. Gary swiveled in his chair to look out the window at the chaos unfolding below. People were running and stampeding down the sidewalks, looks of sheer terror on their faces. Something was very wrong. His first thought that it was just another terrorist attack or mass shooting incident. Those had become all too common in recent years. This felt different, more widespread and bizarre. That's when the first blood-curdling scream echoed through the office. It came from the lobby area. Then another, and another. Horrible wet crunching sounds mixed with the shrieking. What the hell? Gary grabbed the aluminum baseball bat he kept by his desk, mostly as an intimidating conversation piece, and headed out to investigate. The scene that awaited in the lobby foyer made his jaw drop. Bodies strewn about, blood and entrails everywhere. And there were people tearing into the bodies with their bare hands and teeth, ripping them apart and eating their remains. Monsters, cannibals, not people, Gary tried to rationalize. Except they looked just like normal people. His friend Bob from payroll was hunched over an eviscerated body, his blue dress shirt now soaked with dark stains, flesh and tendons dangling from his teeth. Gary, help me! Oh God, help me! The voice called out. Cheryl, one of the admins, was backing away from the grisly feeding frenzy, eyes wide with shock. Without hesitation, Gary rushed over and swung the bat, cracking it across the skull of the nearest flesh eater, sending him tumbling in a heap. He grabbed Cheryl by the arm, and they sprinted for the stairwell, mowing down any others that got in their path. As they burst outside into the open air, the city had already descended in complete pandemonium all around them. Fires raged in the distance, car crashes and explosions rocked the streets, and there were those people, those infected ghouls, roaming and shambling about, aimlessly attacking anything that moved. The reports started trickling in from the radio and emergency broadcast systems. Everywhere was being hit with this plague, this reign of the undead. The dead were rising to attack the living. Mass hysteria, panic in the streets. The world as they knew it was ending. Gary reached into his pocket and clutched a little silver ST medallion he'd been attending AA meetings for. He hadn't had a drink in 8 months. Somehow, he knew those days were over. It was going to be a long night, an even longer road ahead. He glanced over at Cheryl, her face streaked with tears and panic. At least for now, they had each other, for whatever that was worth, in this new, ungodly reality. The sounds of chaos echoed all around them as the evening sun began to set over the cityscape. Gary knew they needed to find shelter and safety, quickly before nightfall. Stumbling half-dazed through the streets, They noticed a small convenience store up ahead that seemed relatively intact. "This way!" Gary hissed, pulling Cheryl with him as they sprinted for the store's entrance. He pounded on the locked doors until a frantic clerk inside cautiously opened up to let them scramble inside. A few other disheveled survivors were already inside as well, barricading the windows and doors with shelving units and whatever supplies they could find. "You folks okay?" The clerk eyed them suspiciously as Gary and Cheryl bent over, hands on their knees trying to catch their breath. We made it out of the office," Cheryl sputtered between heavy breaths. "Those things were everywhere, eating people." "Tell me about it." The clerk shook his head gravely. "Whole damn city's gone to hell in a handbasket from what we've seen on the news. Riots, looting, and then those sickos started showing up." From the small portable TV behind the counter, the emergency news broadcast was repeating the same dire warnings on a continuous loop, advising citizens to stay indoors, avoid all contact with those who had been infected, and not to engage them under any circumstances. The military was being deployed to contain the situation and establish quarantine areas. But how, Gary thought, could you quarantine something like this when it was already everywhere? One of the other survivors, a man in a tattered blue business suit, was pressing his face up against the glass trying to peer outside. "There's more of them coming!" he shouted back in a panicked voice. "Did anyone see how this whole nightmare started?" Gary shook his head slowly, still in shock. It truly was like a nightmare you couldn't wake up from. Just hours ago, he was doing taxes and making copies like any other mind-numbing day. He looked around at the pitiful little group of haggard survivors surrounding him now as the sickening groans of the undead grew closer outside. "Anyone know what we should do?" He tried to steady his voice and stay strong. As unlikely as it seemed, Gary felt an increasing sense that he might be the one to lead them through this, at least for tonight. "Maybe we should make a run for it," the young woman clutching a newborn baby to her chest suggested meekly. "Run where?" Gary didn't say it out loud. Nowhere seemed safe anymore. The only choice was to hunker down here for as long as they could and try to outlast the horrors unfolding outside those walls. He started working on reinforcing the entrance, determined to try and prepare a fortified safe haven for their scrappy little group to survive the night. As the dead congregated outside, pawing and clawing at the glass, their guttural moans of ravenous hunger growing louder and more inhuman, Gary knew it would be a very long night indeed. But for tonight at least, he would do whatever it took to protect these people and ensure they all lived to see another day, even if that new day promised nothing but utter desolation and hell on earth. The incessant pounding and scratching of the barricaded doors and windows never let up through the night. Gary could hardly believe those things, those mindless ghouls didn't require any rest or reprieve from their relentless efforts to reach the living prey inside the little convenience store. He did what he could to fortify their defenses, stacking shelves and whatever supplies were available to board up any weaknesses. But truth be told, Gary knew it was only a matter of time before their flimsy fortress was breached, especially if more of those undead horrors continued to join the mass outside. A small band of scraggly survivors huddled together through the long hours of darkness. Nobody dared make more than a whimper, for fear of attracting more unwanted attention to their location. They took turns keeping watch of the cracked security monitors that offered a live feed look at the surreal nightmare unfolding in the parking lot and streets surrounding them. The groaning, that ungodly groaning sound, would be forever seared into Gary's mind. It was the primal, guttural cry of pure, insatiable hunger, as if the very undead could sense and smell their prey like bloodhounds, growing more frenzied and ravenous by the hour. "Hey, I think that one used to be my boss," the man in the tattered suit whispered to Gary, pointing to the security feed to one of the putrid, disfigured corpses mindlessly clawing at the front doors. "I think they've all turned into those things," Gary grimaced. "Everyone we knew." The horrible realization started to sink in that this wasn't just an isolated outbreak. This unfolding nightmare was happening globally. Everyone. He felt a sinking pit of dread visualizing all the major cities being overrun by this tidal wave of living dead. How could anything stop this? Those are the terrifying thoughts that raced through Gary's mind as he clung to his aluminum baseball bat, his grip still slick with old blood and grime from the first attacks. At least it was a weapon, something to defend them, even if it was futile. A sudden loud crash rang out as one of the front windows cracked open. Shattered glass sprang everywhere as the rotted arm and hand came lurching inside, scrabbling wildly to pull itself through. The younger woman huddled in the corner let out a shriek of terror as he shielded her infant's face. Gary was on his feet in an instant, bringing the baseball bat down hard on the creature's arm until it severed completely with a nauseating crunch. "We can't stay here!" He shouted over the deafening cacophony of 1,000 groans and growls now as more of the undead horde surged forward. "We need to move, now!" Cheryl and the clerk helped them ram a heavy shelf unit in front of the newly formed breach, using every ounce of their strength. But Gary knew it was only a temporary solution at best. How much longer could they withstand this onslaught of the damned? "Back door," the clerk instructed. "If we can make it out the alleyway exit, maybe we can find another place to hide out." It was a slim chance, and they all knew it. But as Gary helped hoist the young mother to her feet, cradling her whimpering baby, he knew they had no other choice. With a terse nod to his ragtag group of survivors, he leveled his bat in hand and said to himself, "All right then, let's move out. If any of us are going to live to see tomorrow, we go together, now." Gary kicked open the back door to the alleyway and immediately recoiled at the wave of putrid stench that hit him. More of those things were gathered in the narrow passageway between buildings, alerted by the sound of the door clattering open. He steeled himself and charged forward, bat raised high as he bashed through the first cluster of undead that turned to face them, with unseeing, ravenous hunger in their lifeless eyes. Cheryl was close behind him, wielding a pipe she'd found to knock them away as they pressed forward. "This way!" the clerk shouted, taking the lead and pointing them down a side path that seemed slightly more clear for the moment. Gary ushered the rest of the terrified survivors to follow, keeping himself between them and the closing circle of ghouls. The mother sobbed and clutched her wailing infant tightly to her chest. The businessman stumbled along looking half dazed with shock, as if he couldn't process this wasn't all some vivid nightmare to wake from. Cheryl swung her pipe in a wide arc, caving in the skulls of 2 former humans who shambled at her, indistinguishable from the rows of mindless undead except for their ripped business casual attire. She paused for the briefest second, panting to catch her breath, and Gary saw the gut-wrenching realization hit her. Those used to be their coworkers, their friends, their former lives. No time to grieve now. Gary yanked her arm, pulling her forward as they continued their desperate flight down the maze of trash-strewn alleyways. The sounds of savage snarls echoing all around them as the entire waking world had become a living hellscape of nightmares. Someone reached out and grabbed a fistful of Gary's shirt from behind, wheeling him around with surprising force and knocked him off balance. He came face to distorted face with one of the creatures, its lipless maw opening to reveal a trio of curved fangs dripping with clotted blood and gore. "Oh God, Karen!" The words caught in Gary's throat as he recognized the desiccated features of their former HR manager as his old accounting firm. Her gnarled fingers closed around his throat as she leaned in, hunger blazing in those dead milk white eyes, jaws snapping wildly like a rabid dog mere inches from his face. He could smell the stench of death on her every exhale, a cold, grave-like miasma. Gary swung the bat in a wide arc, putting every ounce of strength he had in bashing the monster's skull. It felt like caving in a pumpkin as her head erupted in a spray of blackened gore and bone shards. She crumpled to the filthy pavement with a gurgling moan that trailed off in a chilling silence. "I'm so sorry," Gary muttered quietly, knowing there was no humanity left in the undead husk. If this was the fate of everyone he knew and loved, perhaps it was a mercy to put them out of their agony. The others stared at him with pale faces, as shocked by his act as Gary himself was. He realized with a pit of revulsion that Karen, that thing, used to be someone's wife, a daughter, a living, breathing human being like them not too long ago. We have to keep moving." The clerk's frantic shout broke the tension as their grisly fight for survival in this new literal hell on earth pressed on. They pressed on through the shadowy labyrinth of alleyways, not sure if they were heading towards any real safety, or just running in blind panic. Gary stayed at the rear of the group, bat at the ready to bash through any undead stragglers that pursued them. Every few minutes, another chorus of ravenous growls and the pitter-patter of clumsy, uncoordinated footsteps would start echoing from the darkness behind. That meant more of those things were honing in on their scent of life. Gary didn't know much about the insane reality they'd woken into. But he knew one thing. The undead were instinctively driven to hunt and consume whatever living flesh remained. Up ahead, he could see the flickering glow of streetlights from an open avenue. The clerk stopped and peered around the corner cautiously before waving them on. "This way! Hurry now! Move it!" As they spilled out into the main road, Gary felt his stomach churn at the scene of utter desolation surrounding them. Abandoned cars were strewn everywhere, clouded into storefronts and street lamps. The crumbling edifice of a city bus stuck out of a brick facade. The bodies of those trapped inside pressed against the shattered windshield in a frozen, last rictus of terror. Thick black pillars of smoke stained the night sky crimson as raging fires raged unchecked throughout the cityscape. And as they walked among it all, hundreds, maybe thousands, aimlessly wandered the now deserted streets and sidewalks, some in tattered clothing, others completely naked and streaked with drying viscera. Many were hideously mauled, whole chunks of flesh and organs hanging loose from gaping open wounds that should have been fatal, but clearly no longer mattered to the undead. "We're not gonna make it," the frazzled businessman sputtered, looking on the verge of panic. The mother huddled low, cradling her fussing child and sobbing quietly in terror. "Yes, we are," Gary stated firmly, more conviction in his voice than he actually felt. "Just keep it together, keep moving in." He felt a telltale prickling in the back of his neck and spun around just as a snarling mouth of jagged teeth lunged from the shadows directly at him. Gary swung the bat in a powerful uppercut, shattering the creature's fetid jaw and setting shards of splintering bone and neon green pus spraying. It went down with an outraged gurgling howl, attracting the attention of a dozen more undead that immediately turned in their direction like sharks scenting a fresh kill. "Run!" Gary roared at the others as he laid into the first wave of attackers, clearing a path for them. Cheryl was by his side, swinging her length of pipe until it struck a glancing blow off one misshapen skull and wrenched free of her hands. "No, damn it!" She turned just as one of the frenzied undead creatures came barreling at her, shrieking like a banshee until its hungry jaws clamped down hard around her wrist. The clerk rushed over wielding a machete he'd found as Cheryl fell to the pavement, kicking and screaming for help. He hacked down in a savage arc, cleaving straight through the thing's neck and sending its snapping head tumbling free. Gary pulled Cheryl up to her feet, her entire forearm drenched crimson from the ragged bite wound. "Cheryl, oh God, you've been bitten!" he gasped, recoiling slightly as a wave of nausea at the implication washed over him. "What? No, please, Gary! Don't let them turn me into those things!" she cried, eyes pleading and welling with tears. A sudden anguished wail split the night as the mother stumbling towards them, cradling her infant protectively. Except it was far too late. The tiny bundle in her arms had been mauled beyond recognition by the undead teeth of a creature that now slumped behind her, skull caved in from the clerk's machete blows. She looked up with eyes devoid of any sentience. Streaked mascara tears carved lines down her expressionless face. "My baby. My beautiful baby," she uttered in a zombie trance as her own life drained away from her before crumpling to the pavement. Gary felt his stomach twist in a knot of anguished horror. He wanted to wrench at the sight of the mangled infant lying lifeless in his mother's arms. A wave of dizzying vertigo hit him as his mind struggled to process the depravity of what he was witnessing unfold. This couldn't be real. It was too nightmarish, too far beyond the realms of conceivable. And yet, the undead proof was everywhere, closing in around them like the clammy caress of the grave itself. "Gary, please." Cheryl's ragged voice pulled him back from the brink of stunned shock. He stared at the ragged bite mark on her arm, already discoloring in mottled shades of gangrenous rot as the vile infection took insidious hold. She knew, as well as he did, what it meant. That she was as good as dead, just delaying the inevitable horror transformation into one of those insatiable ghouls. The resignation in her eyes cut him deeper than any wound. The clerk suddenly shoved his way between them, machete raised as high as more of the undead horde lurched towards them. "We gotta get moving. You want to survive this godforsaken night or what?" Gary's eyes met Cheryl's in that endless, torturous split second of decision. Couldn't leave her behind. Not like this. No matter how excruciating and immersing it would be. With a trembling hand, he gently gripped her unbitten wrist and pulled her along as they fled. The straggling few other survivors surged ahead of them, the terrified businessman leading the way in blind flight. All around the streets were littered with abandoned vehicles, some with faintly glowing headlights still illuminating the path ahead amid the choking haze of smoke and fog. Up ahead loomed the hulking shapes of a vast enclosed parking structure, its multi-level tiers stretching skyward like some brutalist behemoth structure. A few of the undead milled about the structure's entrance, but the way ahead seemed clear for the moment. "There!" the clerk shouted, waving them forward with his machete. "Maybe we can make a stand in there." least for a while. Gary looked back and felt his heart plummet. Dozens more of the nightmarish undead had joined the pursuit behind them. A veritable tidal wave of insatiable hunger and death had given animated form. Their thunderous snarls and howls of rage echoed through the desolate city streets as they closed the distance. Steeling himself, Gary firmed his grip on the bat and turned to face them as the others scrambled in the structure's entrance. "Gary, what are you doing?" the clerk bellowed as he opened a path for the ragged survivors to rush inside to safety. "Buying you all time," Gary shouted back. He wasn't sure what sort of insane plan was formulating in his mind. Maybe he had none at all. All he knew was that someone had to try and stem the relentless tide of undeath, if only for a few precious seconds. As the first of the shrieking ghouls bore down on him, Gary bellowed out a feral roar of his own and charged headlong at them, baseball bats swinging. The undead came at him in a teeming mass of snapping jaws and grasping putrid hands. Gary swung the bat in a wide, arcing frenzy, putting every last ounce of his being into each bludgeoning strike. Rotten skulls caved in with sickening wet crunches. Showers of clotted blood, bone shards, and viscera sprayed outwards with each shattering impact. But for every ghoul he managed to drop, 3 more took their place in the endlessly replenishing horde. A gnarled hand shot out and clamped around his throat with surprising inhuman strength. Jagged nails dug into his flesh as rotted lips peeled back, revealing a distended maw of curved fangs that lunged straight for his face. Gary recoiled just in time, smashing the bat down on the forearm, holding him until it broke with a resounding crack. The creature howled in mindless fury, recoiling just enough for Gary to get some range on his backswing. He swung the bat like a major league power hitter, putting his full weight behind the blow as it connected squarely with the fiend's skull in a grotesque explosion of ruptured bone and pulp brain matter. As it crumbled into an inert heap, he sensed movement from the corner of his eye and spun to face the next attacker. One of the only shreds of living humanity flickered across his mind. The accountant's split-second thought that these undead aberrations had likely all once been normal people too. Mothers, fathers, accountants, grocery clerks, all reduced to mindless cannibalistic ghouls driven by insatiable hunger. He spotted a smaller, clothed figure clawing her way towards him through the teeming ruck and felt a pang of recognition. Little Myrnie, who had come by his office every April to wrangle payments on her daughter's Girl Scout cookie orders. He wondered if her little girl was now one of those things. Gary snapped back to cold reality and swung the bat with both hands, crushing the creature's face with the full weight of the blow. As she fell, he glimpsed a jagged bite mark across her exposed abdomen, entrails spilling outwards and drawing the other undead towards her like sharks to a bloody feast. "No, keep going! Get inside! Gotta get inside!" he gasped, already winded and drenched in putrid gore as he staggered backwards towards the parking structure's entrance. The steel doors had been propped open, providing a temporary refuge for the dwindling cluster of survivors huddled within. Cheryl stood framed at the entrance, eyes wide and pleading amidst a face streaked with tears and viscera, even as the vile contagion overtook her body, clinging to the last fading ember of their shared humanity. "Don't give up. Don't let them take you too," Gary managed between ragged breaths, forcing himself to hold the breach as a few of the clerk and the businessman helped Cheryl retreat back inside the relative safety. As if scenting its living prey attempting to flee, the horde intensified in deafening fervor, a wave of undead crashing towards the unraculated entrance like a tsunami of death itself. Gary planted his feet, squared his stance, and steadied the bat with both hands. He drew a deep breath, preparing for the inevitable onslaught that would soon swallow him as well into the ranks of the living dead. "Come on, you bastards," he growled, grimace defiance etched his bloody face. "Let's end this." As the tidal wave of shrieking, clawing undead slammed into him, Gary swung the bat with every last ounce of desperate fury coursing through his veins. A final battle cry tore from his lungs, echoing into the damned night. I Wish My Zombie Apocalypse Was Cliché. Written by David CI_Codex from r/short scary stories. I have watched countless zombie apocalypse movies to the point that they don't faze me anymore. I've gotten used to the various cliches and tropes such as the classic undead appearance of the infected, to the fact that zombies should either be extremely slow or extremely fast. No in-betweens. I can even predict who might get bitten, who's hiding a bite. That being said, having a zombie apocalypse in real life was not something I predicted. When my wife and I first heard the news, I was honestly terrified, not only because it was actually happening, but because there was no chaos to be seen, no footage of a zombie, no audio of a panic, just the text, infectious zombie disease, outbreak confirmed, details to follow. What's even worse is that it's happening in a city near us, and our 21-year-old son hasn't come back yet from his weekly window shopping at the mall. So imagine my relief hearing my son state that everything was fine where he is and that he would return immediately after I called him about the news. My wife and I continued watching the TV, hoping to find out more about the outbreak, expecting to see details of a quarantine or of the government working on containing the infected. What we didn't expect, however, was an incredibly vague update. Tell me what I was supposed to react when the news just shows the text. Officials are advising citizens at home to keep distance between each person in the vicinity. We were starting to speculate what this could mean. We are already barricaded in our home. Why should we keep distance away from each other? Wouldn't we see if someone was bitten or already a zombie? Is the virus transmitted through an air or physical contact? Why is it called a zombie outbreak then? What if it was all merely a hoax? We started getting really paranoid each passing minute. Finally, after what seemed like hours, we see two news reporters on TV. Though they are both seated far apart and are intently observing each other, all the while eyeing each other, they reported the virus is indeed spread through biting. However, the virus doesn't degrade the body or take over one's mind. The infected stay as normal human, capable of talking and making decisions, just with the sole intent of efficiently biting as many people as possible. The virus has evolved to have a thinking, rational host who knows how to act and wait for the perfect time to strike. Finally, the reporters add, the outbreak has already been ongoing hours even before the warning. The officials do not know the full scale of the outbreak. Keep safe, everyone, and keep your distance, even from family members and friends. Upon hearing this, my wife and I look at each other, wild-eyed. Then a knock on the door. Mom? Dad? I'm here! Reunion at the end of the world. I hope you enjoy. Part 1. The Outbreak. Jason woke up to the sound of sirens blaring outside his window. He shot up in bed, his heart pounding. Grabbing his phone, he saw a flood of emergency alerts about some kind of viral outbreak sweeping across the state. People were being instructed to stay inside and wait for further updates from the authorities. As he moved to the window, Jason was horrified to see chaos unfolding on the streets below. People were running and screaming, some of them staggering and attacking others in a frenzy. He watched in shock as a woman fell to the ground, surrounded by a group of assailants who began tearing at her flesh with their bare hands. Jason felt bile rise in his throat as the reality sank in. This was no ordinary virus, but something far more sinister. He dialed Brian's number frantically, praying his 12-year-old son was still safe at his mother's house across town. When Brian answered, his small voice was trembling with fear. Dad, there are monsters outside trying to get in. I locked all the doors, but I don't know what's happening. Listen to me, Brian, Jason said, his own voice shaking. I'm coming to get you right now. Don't let anyone in, no matter what they say or who they sound like. Do you understand? Yes, Dad. Hurry, please. Swallowing hard, Jason quickly got dressed and armed himself with a baseball bat from the hall closet. He had no idea what was going on, but he knew he had to get to Brian at all costs. Taking a deep breath, he headed out into the nightmare unfolding in the streets. Part 2. The Trickery. The scene outside was like something from his worst nightmares. Fires burned in the roads, cars had piled up from horrific wrecks, and those same staggering, frenzied people were everywhere, attacking anyone in their path. Jason clutched his bat tightly, using back alleys and side streets to avoid as many of the crazed mobs as possible. After what felt like an eternity of terror and close calls, Jason finally arrived at the upscale neighborhood where his ex-wife Karen lived with Brian. The streets were strangely deserted, an eerie silence hanging in the air. He was about to spring to Karen's house when a familiar voice called out, Jason? Oh, thank God you're here! Jason spun around to see Karen herself hurrying toward him, looking disheveled but unharmed. Relief flooded through him as he rushed to embrace her. Karen, I was so worried. Is Brian okay? Where is he? Jason asked urgently. Karen pulled back, giving him a stricken look. Oh, Jason, it's worse than we thought. Some of those things got in the house. Brian, he's been bitten. The words hit Jason like a sledgehammer to the gut. He felt the world spinning around him as he struggled to process what she was saying. No, that can't be. Where is he? Tears streamed down Karen's face. He's inside, resting. But Jason, he's changing. I've seen what happens after the bite. We have to put him out of his misery before he turns into one of those monsters. Jason froze, his mind utterly unable to accept those words. Put Brian out of his misery? No, there has to be another way. A cure, treatment, anything. He would never give up his son like that. Suddenly he noticed a strange, almost feral glint in Karen's eyes that made him take a step back. You're not Karen, he breathed, gripping his bat tighter. A cruel smile twisted across his ex-wife's face, making her features look almost inhuman. You always were too sentimental, Jason. That's why you'll never survive in this new world of ours. In a blur of motion, the thing that had been Karen launched itself at Jason with horrifying speed and strength. He swung the bat in desperation, cracking against its skull with a sickening crunch. It collapsed to the ground, unmoving. Jason stared at the broken form, his heart pounding. Whatever these things were, they could somehow take the shapes and memories of their former human selves to lure in their victims. And now one of them had Karen's face. He had to find his son before it was too late. Part 3. The Reunion. Jason raced to Karen's house, his bat at the ready. He had no idea what deceptions might be waiting for him inside. Taking a deep breath to steady himself, he slowly pushed open the front door and stepped into the entryway, senses on high alert. Ryan! He called out in a harsh whisper. Ryan, it's Dad! Where are you? There was no response except an ominous silence. Jason crept further into the house, checking each room with his heart in his throat. Finally, he reached the hallway that led to Brian's room. As he neared the closed door, Jason heard a faint sound, sobbing. He felt his chest constrict painfully as he recognized Brian's muffled cries. Steeling himself, he threw open the door, bat raised high. But the room was empty except for Brian, huddled on the bed and sobbing into his knees. At the sound of the door, his head whipped up, eyes wide with terror. Dad! The sheer relief and joy in Brian's voice was like a physical force that made Jason sway. In an instant, he had crossed the room and swept his son into a fierce embrace, feeling as if an immense weight had lifted from his heart. It's okay, Brian. I'm here now. We're going to get out of here, you and me. I won't let anything hurt you, I promise. The words tumbled out in a rush as Jason held his child close, stroking his hair gently. He had made it. Against all odds, he had reached his son. Brian clung to him tightly, his tears soaking Jason's shirt. I was so scared. Mom came home, but she wasn't herself anymore. She tried to... His small body shook with sobs. Jason pulled back, cupping Brian's face in his hands and staring into his eyes intently. Listen to me. That wasn't your mom. Not really. Those things out there, they can make people shape somehow and use their memories against you. But we're going to get out of the city. Find somewhere safe to wait this out. Wiping his tears, Brian nodded bravely. Jason smiled, so proud of his son's strength. That's my guy. Now, we need to move quickly and quietly, you understand? Stay close to me and do everything I say. As they crept back through the house, Jason felt a profound sense of purpose. All that mattered was getting Brian to safety, no matter what horrors they faced. With a surge of resolve, he led his son out into the night, leaving the forsaken streets behind as they set off to find refuge from this nightmare. And though the road ahead would be perilous, Jason knew, as long as they had each other, they could prevail against any threat. His family was alive, and that was reason enough to keep hope burning bright, no matter how dark the world became. Okay, bear with me. I am fully aware that this is a very cheesy zombie story, and I think I know the only reason I ended up doing a very cheesy zombie story is because Father's Day is tomorrow, and I have 5 kids of my own. Yeah, these kind of stories really hit home to me. the way I came up with the prompt was I had read a book called The Rising. It used very similar elements to this, where people still kept... So basically they would die, someone would take them over, basically. Some kind of weird force would take them over, and they would have access to all their memories. So they could trick people into opening doors, they could do all sorts of things. They could drive, they could shoot. They were basically just humans, but like unkillable humans. It was awful. Worst zombie apocalypse I've ever read. But it also had like a father-son thing too. Another reason why I had a hard time getting through that book was listening to a father talk to his son like a state over, or a couple cities over, whatever it was, and try to get to his son during the beginning of zombie apocalypse. The kid was little in the thing. My son was very little during that time too when I was reading it, and so I just kind of wanted a nice version of that, like a happy ending version of that, which is very off-brand for me. I am usually very much the bad ending kind of guy, the sad ending, like nobody wins at the end. But for this one, for Father's Day, I wanted to have this. So if you're a father, happy Father's Day. Hell, if you're a single mom, happy Father's Day. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your day tomorrow, tonight. And as always, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you guys next time. And remember to always face your fears.